Aisha was sleeping soundly in the middle of the night when her phone suddenly rang and she was shocked awake. Her irritation and grogginess disappeared entirely when she saw that the one calling was none other than her crush Aubrey. "Hey, is everything okay?" Aisha sounded so alert on the phone that Aubrey sighed in relief, believing she didn't wake her up. "See, can you turn on the news?" Aubrey meekly asked. "He saves lives for a living. Today, they saved his. He saves lives for a living. Today, they saved his." Sponsored, AirMed Care Network. Read next story. Aisha fumbled around in her bed for the TV remote before flipping on the news. There was a breaking news story about an escaped convict who was on the loose. The man's mug shot showed an ugly-looking man in his mid-40s with orange hair and black eyes. "Why do you care about?" Aisha's words trailed off as the list of the man's crimes was displayed on screen. A sickening feeling spread to her chest and an idea bubbled up into her mind, but she prayed that she wasn't right. "Is that him?" She received no reply, but judging by the muffled whimpering she could hear coming from the other side of the phone, she knew she had her answer. "Where's Malachi?" Aubrey spoke through choked sobs as she explained that Mal wasn't home and that he wasn't answering his phone either. Aisha's anger reached a boiling point. "You dick. Your sister is traumatized and you're out somewhere doing God's know what." For about 2 weeks now, Malachi had been acting very distant. It wasn't just with her, even those in the guild noticed and wondered what could have possibly happened to the cheerful young man they'd seen before. Aisha had allowed him his space out of respect for their friendship, but this had gone way too far. "Aubrey, put some clothes on, okay? I'm going to come and get you." Aisha hopped out of bed and hurriedly began throwing on clothes. Sniff okay. The pair stayed on the phone right until Aisha arrived at her door to pick her up. I didn't ask where we were going?" Aubrey realized. "Don't worry." Aubrey took Aisha's hand and led her into the elevator toward her car. "We're gonna go and get some answers, okay?" Aubrey wasn't sure exactly what that meant, but the warmth of Aisha's hand in hers did wonders for her nerves. The sensation was very faint, but she started to get the feeling that everything was going to be okay. Bang, bang, bang. "Aisha, it's pretty late, maybe we shouldn't. We'll apologize for that later, but for right now, we need answers, and I'm sure she's got 'em. But what if dash?" Click. The door they'd been banging on so fiercely finally opened, and a groggy Say opened the door with a weary Surana not far behind her holding a bat. "Damn it, Mal. I hate you right now, but you have good taste." As Aisha peeked at Say's massive bust that was barely hidden in her bathrobe, she had to give Malachi credit where it was due. "Aubrey and Aisha? What are you doing here at this time of night? Sorry to bother you, but it's about Mal. That 6-foot sack of shit isn't answering his phone and we're wondering if you know where he might be." "Geez, they aren't joined at the hip, you know? Why would my mom know where he is?" Surana rolled her eyes and returned her bat to its spot by the door. Say's face took on a complicated expression before she stood aside and invited the girls in. "Well, Mom, you guys are that close already? Have you guys had sex yet?" "And no, we have not." Smack. "Ow. It was just a question." After giving her daughter a hard smack over the head, Say led the girls to the living room where she told them to make themselves comfortable as she went to go prepare tea. As Surana stared at the two girls on the couch, an evil smirk crossed her face when she saw that they were holding hands. "So, how long have the two of you been together?" "She just picked me up from my house a little while ago." Aubrey answered. "No, I mean how long have you guys been dating?" Surana gave Aubrey an exhausted look. "Pardon? Come again?" Seeing the blank expression on Aubrey's face and embarrassed one on Aisha's, Surana was able to roughly grasp the situation and smiled. "Oh? My mistake. I wonder if Malachi knows." Say returned carrying a pot of tea and a large briefcase. After pouring tea for the two girls, she passed the briefcase to Aisha, and she frowned when she realized it was filled with something. "Before you open that, I want to say that what I am about to tell you cannot leave this room." Aisha was suspicious, but she nodded and unzipped the briefcase in her arms to reveal its contents. "Shit. What the hell? We were rich this whole time?" Surana's gave her mother an accusatory look. "It's not ours, it's Malachi's." Say corrected. "He didn't know what to do with it, so he gave it to me for safekeeping." "Does this have something to do with why he's been acting so strange?" Aubrey hadn't taken her eyes off the exorbitant amount of money since it was revealed to the room. Say gave a small nod before she explained everything to the girls in the room. She started with how she called Mal to meet with Rowan one day after training. She then went on to explain how Rowan hired him to kill someone and Mal initially declined before he realized who he was being asked to kill. The girls also found out that Malachi was worried about how he'd be seen by his loved ones for doing something so horrible as killing another man. They also heard about how he'd been visiting the old Rowan almost every day for the last 2 weeks to learn how his powers were intended to be used as well as their limits. Finally, she explained that tonight was the night he'd decided to kill Arthur. When Say finished speaking, silence filled the room once more. Aubrey felt relieved and a little ashamed. Was she such a bad sister that her brother thought she would look at him like a monster? All of Aisha's rage had disappeared, leaving her in a reflective mood as well. She wasn't mad at Mal at all for killing that scumbag, on the contrary, she was rather jealous. She'd give anything to get her hands on the bastard who destroyed the lives of her 2 best friends. You bastard, you were carrying all this around, but you didn't even think you could tell me about it? Both girls had a lot to think about. Old man Rowan never slept much since his daughter passed away, but last night, he couldn't close his eyes for even a single second. Malachi left from his house last night and went to enact their revenge, and the old man was slightly nervous. Over the past 2 weeks, he'd actually come to look at Malachi like something of a son. They spent a lot of time together while he was teaching him to use his powers, and it was impossible for him not to begin to grow fond of the young man. His infectious personality made him easily likable, and their shared hatred of the same man gave them something to bond over. The 2 weeks were spent teaching Mal how to control his blessing of the night and utilize its power to fit the situation. Because the night can be any time that Malachi wishes, his power can be very showy. Due to that, all of the training had to be conducted when it was already nighttime to negate any questions being aroused. Mal already knew that he could see anything covered by night, but traveling to anything was an entirely different matter. Apparently he'd done it when he'd first awakened his powers, but he described that as more of a freak accident. It took 2 entire weeks, and all he managed to learn was how to teleport without fail. Rowan leaned back into his chair and stared at his farm as he thought of Malachi's frightening potential. Even he didn't know the limit of Malachi's abilities, but he was certain of one thing for sure. With enough time and training, Malachi could cover the entire planet in an endless night. While that was a scary thought for some, it would only be that way for those that did not know Malachi personally or share his appreciation for the night. Did you wait long? Rowan turned his head to see Malachi leaning against a support beam with his standard glasses and a cigarette in his mouth. He would have looked pretty suave if his shirt and hands were not covered in blood. I guess I don't need to ask how it went. Rowan chuckled. How'd you get all the way back here so fast anyway? Malachi knocked the ash off his cigarette before his entire body began to float upwards. Telekinesis works in more ways than one might think. Malachi pulled up a seat right next to Rowan and promptly handed him a cigarette and a lighter. Smoking had become a habit he'd picked up from the old man to ease his stress. It wasn't like he could destroy his body after all now that he was a blessed, so what was the harm? You should really stop smoking, old man. Says the kid who just handed me a cigarette and a lighter. You looked like you needed it. Haven't been sleeping, have you? I'll sleep when I'm dead. That'll be soon if you keep smoking. The two chuckled at their usual back and forth banter as they entered a period of silence and simply watched the cows graze on the farm. I won't ask you for any details, but... Did he suffer? Rowan finally asked after minutes of silence. Horribly was Malachi's only reply. The old man shed a single tear and offered his daughter a final goodbye. He felt as if her spirit had finally been avenged. Thank you, Malachi. No thanks necessary, old man. Mal didn't feel he deserved thanks. He didn't feel like his actions were heroic or praiseworthy. The reality is that he broke into a prison to kidnap an inmate that was already serving a life sentence so that he could murder him for revenge. Is that something a hero would do? Ah, I almost forgot. Rowan took out Malachi's phone from his pocket and handed it to him. You were blowing up last night. When Mal looked at the list of missed calls from his sister, he initially panicked. But when his eyes landed on the most recent message, he calmed down slightly, but his fear was now replaced with confusion. Aubrey, sorry for calling so much, but I'm fine now, come home as soon as you can. Malachi quickly got up from his seat and said a quick farewell to Rowan before quickly flying home. Damn kid. Didn't even clean himself off. Malachi only remembered certain wardrobe issues about halfway to his destination. At that point, he decided to change tactics a bit and instead of walking through the front door, he flew onto his balcony. He was surprised, however, when upon opening the sliding door, he found his home was currently having guests. Serana and Say were here and Aisha and Aubrey as well. The women were apparently cooking in the kitchen, but upon seeing Malachi enter through the balcony door, they immediately froze. Malachi could feel the gazes on his bloody shirt and hands and screamed at himself internally. That's right. I'm a monster now. He'd never wanted anyone to see him like this, least of all the women whom he was closest to. A great fear welled up in him that these women would never see him the same way again. Suddenly, Aubrey stumbled forward before she ran into her brother and gave him a big hug. Malachi was completely unprepared for this turn of events. Shouldn't she be scared or running away? Hey, get off, I'm Dash. The best brother ever. Aubrey finished. He froze at her words and stared at her like she was some kind of odd creature. Sensing that she wasn't going to let go anytime soon, he sighed before he returned her hug. Malachi felt footsteps approaching and looked up to see the rest of the girls coming to embrace him as well. Even Aisha was coming to hug him, causing him to question whether or not he was really dreaming. He wasn't completely sure why they were acting like this, but he had a general idea. Far from being upset with Say for spilling the beans, he was actually grateful. He didn't know he'd need the support of these women as much as he did. In this moment, there was nothing greater that could have soothed his soul. Malachi was currently letting the hot water from the shower wash the dried blood off his body. His mind was still addled with the reactions of the girls when he returned. They didn't ask any questions, nor did they cast judgments. Their only request was that if he should go through something again, he not shy away from the people that loved him. I know I said I would listen to them, but... Malachi shut off the water and grabbed a towel from the rack before proceeding to dry off. He briefly glanced in the mirror and got a look at his body's newest addition. Ever since he'd killed Arthur, Malachi's eyes had not reverted from that predatory orange. He didn't know if it was a symbol of the stain on his soul or some other factor, but he now went even farther out of his way to hide his eyes than before. Malachi began to get dressed before grabbing his bag with spare clothes inside and heading out. The girls appeared to be waiting for him and were surprised when he came out with a bag over his shoulder. Where are you going? Malachi patted his inquisitive sister's head and gave her a warm smile. I have weapons training today, kiddo. Mal, are you sure you should? I can call Rose and tell her you. Say and Aisha each began trying to dissuade Malachi from heading into other things so soon after the events of last night, but he felt like a good distraction was what he needed best right now. Sigh, all right then. If you're determined to do this, then I guess there's no other way. Aisha pulled out her phone and began texting rapidly. Bianca Tate was having a pretty good morning. Even though she was the newest member of Immortal Moon, she was already the most popular. Her bold yet cheerful personality made it easy for her to make friends with her fellow guildmates, and she had quite the large social circle. The young girl checked her watch and saw that it was about time for her favorite part of the day. She smiled and skipped merrily to the fourth-floor training room. Along the way, she got knowing smirks from most of the women in the guild, but she didn't pay them any mind. When she arrived at her destination, the metallic door slid open to reveal Malachi browsing over a table full of weapons with a thoughtful expression. Rose was standing next to him and seemed to be giving him details about each of the weapons present. Bianca was about to call out to him and blow him a kiss when she noticed the training room was a bit more crowded than usual. Standing against the wall were 3 women, but she only recognized 2 of them. One was Aisha, and the other was a young girl she remembered to be Malachi's sister. But who's that woman there? The last member of the group was a mature woman with long soft brown hair and eyes to match. She had a large bust that made even hers look inadequate and a warm motherly aura. Suddenly, the door opened behind Bianca and Luna walked in. What's wrong? Do you know who that woman is? Luna followed Bianca's gaze to the mature woman next to Aisha. When Aisha texted her about visitors' passes earlier, she was too busy, so she just agreed without asking who they were for. But seeing this incredibly beautiful woman whose eyes never left Malachi for a single second, she could only think of one possible answer. I think that's his girlfriend. Oh, that's his, what? Oblivious to the storm brewing behind him, Malachi had just listened to Rose's long summary of all the weapons available to him. So? What do you think? Rose asked. She was hoping Malachi would choose a good pair of gauntlets due to his monstrous physical strength and improvement in hand-to-hand combat. As he stared at all the weapons in front of him, Malachi couldn't help but think about the events of last night. He didn't much enjoy the feeling of having blood all over him, so if possible, he'd prefer to mainly fight long range. With that in mind, he picked up a belt that contained several gleaming silver knives. Throwing knives? Rose looked slightly disappointed. Are you sure? Yeah. I think these will work great. Alright then, wanna do a test run? Rose didn't really understand Malachi's choice, but she knew he had pretty good instincts. Malachi nodded and slipped on the belt. Hard Light Simulation G26. At Rose's command, several holograms of large muscular kobolds materialized in the room. The training rooms were capable of producing ultra-realistic simulations of monsters inside gates. They looked real, felt real, and the damage they could do was real as well. But of course they could be weakened for beginners. Although Rose had neglected to activate Training Wheels mode due to her being too deep in thought about why a physical fighter like Malachi would choose something like throwing knives. 3, 2, 1. Ruoya. After the simulation's countdown, the hulking monstrosities launched forward. I've never seen him use throwing knives before. I hope he'll be okay. The scene displayed in front of Rose gradually made her lose her train of thought. The kobolds had taken no more than 3 steps forward when the silver knives launched from Malachi's belt at a speed almost imperceptible to the naked eye. Howls of pain filled the air as the pack of kobolds were diced into chunks in only 10 seconds. Cuts accumulated all over their massive bodies until entire pieces of them hit the ground and they broke apart into fragments of light. When all the projections disappeared, Malachi returned the blades to his belt and nodded in satisfaction. Truthfully, there was another reason why Mal had decided on a long-range weapon instead of a close-quarters one. Malachi had chosen this as his main weapon to keep his animal instincts in check, and it seemed like the idea was working smoothly. After all, if he wanted to fight close range, there was no better weapon for him than the massive black claws that he could grow from his fingertips. But after completely losing himself when he killed Arthur, Mal wanted to avoid having to use those as much as possible. Mal looks for his trainer to ask for her input and turned around to see her staring at him like he was a freak of nature. Rose? You good? She didn't even know how to answer him. Malachi was not the first to use telekinesis to better control his weapon, but he was the first to control so many simultaneously. Not only that, the speed at which he'd launched those blades was frightening. She thought she knew the full extent of Malachi's capabilities, but he was once again showing her he had so much still in store. Fucking unreal. Huh? Rose shook her head, indicating for Malachi not to pay her any mind. That settles it. Initially, she planned to train him a little while longer, but after what she'd just seen, she didn't have any more doubts. Mal, I think you're ready for your first gate. You sure? Mal hadn't expected this turn of events at all. He'd only been training 2 weeks, and Aisha had told him she'd trained much longer. I'm positive. Rose shook her head firmly. Don't tell me our only male member is scared? She teased. HM? Oh yeah, totally. I've seen what hordes of female goblins do to human males, and I am terrified. Mal shook his head in disgust as he remembered the unspeakable nightmares. Who knew a single night spent browsing too deep in the internet would be so damaging? Rose giggled before patting his shoulder to ease his nerves. Don't worry. You'll be going in with a party, and you'll all be responsible for each other. Plus, since you're new, you won't be going to a gate above C rank, so there won't be hordes of anything. Truthfully, Malachi was only joking about being nervous, but Rose's attempt to help his nerves really touched his heart. Thanks, Rose. I mean it. The woman's smile grew even wider. Is our bright and cheerful Malachi finally back? I was wondering when I'd hear you crack a joke again. You like my jokes? Gods know, they're worse than cancer, but after a while, you start to get used to them. Unbeknownst to Rose, Malachi took a small arrow to his pride when he heard that. He might have a lot of other things going on now, but before he got blessed, he always prided himself on being funny. 013. 031. Look, I don't know what was wrong with you, but you have friends here that you can talk to, you know? Rose's voice spurred him from his spiral, and he offered her a simple smile. I know, Teach, thanks. Rose told him to go and get changed since he was done for the day and she would begin making preparations for his first gate. Malachi went to go get changed with a lightness in his steps. After this, he was going to go and have some fun with the girls since they refused to leave his side today. Even though he put up a resistance, he was actually quite touched. Where should we go after this? While Malachi was heading off to change out of his sweats, Say and Aubrey were still semi-frozen in shock from the spectacle they'd just seen. How did he even? Was he always that strong? Aisha could understand the two girls' reactions since she was a bit awestruck herself. It seemed like her friend was getting more and more impressive every day. Say was the most mesmerized by Malachi's strength. Such a person. Really wants to be with me? A warm feeling began to spread throughout her chest. Even if she did not believe it would last, she was nonetheless incredibly grateful that Malachi had chosen her. Hello. The girls were suddenly greeted by an approaching Luna and Bianca. Say immediately felt starstruck by the beauty of the two women. She'd never seen such mesmerizing women in her whole life. Aisha made introductions and the two groups exchanged pleasantries. So are you Malachi's girlfriend? Bianca was straight to the point and did not waste any time. Say immediately felt her face get hot, but she did not deny it. With a simple shy nod, she confirmed Bianca and Luna's suspicions. Ah, come on sister-in-law, don't be shy. Aubrey teased. I am not. Say's reddening face was not making her lie any more convincing. Bianca looked Say up and down before nodding, seemingly understanding something. I'll admit you're beautiful and you have a great figure. Eh? Say was unused to compliments, especially ones that came by surprise. But I won't give up on Mal so easily. I'm here today to declare myself your rival. My. What? Before Bianca could even restate her declaration, her mouth was covered by Luna and she received an elbow in the ribs from Aisha. This one's a bit slow, please don't pay her any mind. Luna offered a sincere apology. She then said a farewell before she proceeded to drag Bianca away, the young blessed making muffled remarks the entire way out the door. Don't let her bother you, Say. Aubrey reassured. Well if I'm honest, I have already prepared myself for things like this. She tried to force a smile, but it was difficult. It felt as if she'd been punched right in the chest and had the wind knocked out of her sails. Was it time for Mal to walk away from her already? I thought I'd have a bit more time. In a large corporate building, Alex Heller was currently seated behind a desk with a thoughtful expression on his face. He was currently going over guild expenses while brewing silently over a certain lost resource. Knock, knock. Come in. The door suddenly opened to reveal a beautiful blonde-haired woman wearing formal attire. What is it, Celine? Alex's secretary knew he didn't like to be disturbed, so he was certain this had to be important. The woman did not respond and instead handed him a tablet with the page pulled up to the latest news article. There in big bold letters was a headline about Immortal Moon's rising star. Apparently, it was finally time for his debut into the world and he'd been assigned his first C-rank dungeon. There appeared to be quite the buzz online, with multiple news outlets posting the same story each with millions of views. Apparently, he was going to be a part of a simple 3-man team with one additional civilian going in with them to livestream his capabilities to the world. Gods, this'll be great. Alex tossed the tablet back to Celine and laughed hysterically. Nothing could humiliate Immortal Moon more than setting up a public execution. He'd make Malachi look like another cocky brat who'd gone into a gate with no real idea of the horrors inside. And Luna and her guild would look like the most incompetent guild in the world when they couldn't utilize someone as talented as Malachi. Call Sierra and tell her I need a favor. She does this for me and we'll forgive her debt. Celine nodded and promptly left the office to carry out what she was sure would be another tragedy. Currently, Say and Malachi were sitting on the couch watching a movie. The day had been long and arduous to say the least, especially since Mal's name had once again flared up. A few days had gone by since the news that Malachi was going to be entering his first dungeon released, causing everyone around him to go into a frenzy. Was he scared? Excited? Which weapon would he use? Would he wear armor? People wanted to know everything about anything that was related to his plans. In truth, he did not have any. That's why he was currently sitting on his couch with Say while receiving a lap pillow and watching Moana. Was there any better way to spend an evening before a big event? I wonder how the world would react if they knew the famous Malachi Saint still watches cartoons. Say teased. Mal looked at her as if she'd just made an unbelievable statement. Is there someone alive that doesn't enjoy cartoons? Yes, honey, lots of people. Mal shook his head and returned his attention back to the singing tattooed man on screen. Then those people are not living, they are already dead inside. Foo, maybe. The pair carried on like that for a while, with Malachi occasionally bursting into song and Say shyly joining him. As it got later and later, Malachi began to wonder why Aubrey still wasn't home. She'd gone out with Aisha earlier in the day, and it was now almost 11 o'clock and she wasn't home. She was with one of the strongest beings alive, so Malachi was sure she was fine, but he still wanted to know what was going on. As soon as he pulled out his phone, however, he received a message from his missing sister. Aubrey, gonna stay at Aisha's tonight. You and Say have the place to yourselves. Winky face. Oh my. Say was reading the message along with Malachi, and when she saw the suggestive nature of Aubrey's text, she couldn't help but blush. Malachi sent an emoji of rolling eyes as a reply and put his phone away. Don't pay her any mind. Say nodded, but her mind was swimming. She knew Malachi was a healthy young man who must have had desires of his own, yet he never rushed her into doing anything. If we did, what would it be like? It had been so long for her, she barely remembered what that level of intimacy was like. And honestly, she was a bit insecure and didn't believe she was quite ready. The movie soon ended and Malachi prepared to take Say home. He opened the door for her and the pair was immediately floored when they saw a duffel bag with a note on top of it. Say recognized the handwriting as Surana's and opened it up and read aloud. Dear Mom, don't come home tonight. I have packed all of your necessities, plus a change of clothes, and a little something special for Malachi. P.S. I am hoping for a... Say did not continue reading the letter, but judging by where it was going, Malachi could guess what was said next. This feels like a planned assault. Malachi could smell something fishy about this whole situation. But if he was honest, he was slightly grateful. Do you want to stay the night? Malachi asked. I could never impose. Malachi did not even allow her to continue and instead placed a tender kiss on her lips. You're my girlfriend, so my place is yours. You could never impose. He pulled her back inside while using telekinesis to take the bag inside and close the door. Say was so swept up in Malachi's natural rhythm, she barely even registered what was going on. The next thing she knew, she was in his bedroom and he was asking her if she wanted to shower first. Wait, Mel. I don't think I'm ready. So you want me to shower first then? And no, I don't think I'm ready to have sex. Say did not realize that she'd yelled that a lot louder than she meant to, and the blush in her face just became even bigger. I understand. He looked at her and smiled warmly. You don't have to worry about any of that right now, I'm not some horny teenager who can't control himself. If Mel was honest, he was nervous too. He'd never had sex before and he was a blessed now too. The stories of blessed injuring their partners when they couldn't control themselves properly were too many to count. You really don't mind? She asked hesitantly. Nah, just ignore the girls, we'll take our time. Malachi waved away her concerns. A warm feeling and a sense of relief flooded her heart that stayed with her long after she got into the shower. The smile did not leave her face until she got out and prepared to get into her night clothes only to see what her daughter had packed for her. An extremely thin black lace teddy with matching stockings and leggings. Where did she even get this? She cannot wear something like this. It wouldn't even look good on her. Or would it? She quickly shook her head furiously to free herself from her delusions. Timidly, Say wrapped herself in a towel before peeking her head out the bathroom door. Malachi was laying on the bed scrolling through his phone absent-mindedly when she called for him. Honey, do you have a shirt I can borrow? The visual of his girlfriend acting so cute with water dripping down her body was almost too much to bear and ended up giving him a small nosebleed. Yeah, just give me a second. He was so distracted by her alluring figure hidden beneath the towel that he didn't even think to question why she'd need a shirt of his in the first place. The two had finally climbed into bed and it was awkward to say the least. Malachi was staring up at the ceiling with his arms and legs tucked in neatly. He didn't want to risk making Say uncomfortable, so his solution was to lay like a dead person. Say didn't fare any better and her heart was beating so loud she was sure Malachi could hear it. It's fine, right? We're just sleeping. She gathered up all of her courage and reached out and took Malachi's hand. With that, the pair relaxed and became a little more comfortable with each other. They spent an hour laying in bed joking and giggling about how silly they were being. After a while, Say noticed Mal had yet to take his glasses off and asked him about it, to which he promptly responded that he was waiting for her to fall asleep. Say was confused since it wasn't like she hadn't seen his eyes before. She didn't want him to think she'd ever be scared of him, so in a rare moment of boldness, she rolled over on top of him and reached to take his sunglasses off. Mal would have tried to stop her had he not been focusing all his attention on making sure his body did not have a certain reaction. When Say removed his glasses and saw the intense predatory orange, she was stunned momentarily, but she was not frightened. She snuggled up under him and did not pay his surprised expression any mind. Now we can fall asleep together. Yeah, good night, Say. The woman did not respond and instead fell asleep with a smile on her face. The next morning. The site of today's gate expedition was an abandoned mall on the outskirts of the city. While the time to enter was scheduled for 11, a crowd had already formed around the area at 8 and police had to enforce crowd control. With the time for the raid approaching, the crowd began to murmur about just when the blessed taking part were going to arrive. The mining crew and the cameraman for today had already showed up a few minutes ago. Now everyone was anticipating the arrival of the man they'd all come to see. Suddenly, a lavish black truck pulled up and the man who stepped out was someone who no one expected to see. Stepping down from his expensive black truck was the red-haired guild master of Ragnarok in his signature burgundy suit. Immediately, everyone became confused about why he was here and thought they might have had the wrong gate. Interviews quickly approached the famous guild master and the answer to why he was here was quite shocking for most. I consider myself to be a fan of Malachi as well, so like all of you, I am here to see his first raid in person. Whoa! This is so awesome. I can't believe my two favorite blessed are going to be in the same place. The public was shocked and rightfully so. As a well-known hothead, the number of people who had a good relationship with Morgan was enough to count on one hand. And those he considered himself to be fans of were even less. But he had just admitted so casually in front of all of these people that he was in fact a fan of Malachi. This was front-page-worthy news already. Suddenly a sleek black limousine pulled up and the day stars arrived. The first to get out was Guildmaster Luna, and the public clamored to get a photo of the extremely captivating woman in a white kimono. Next was a blessed by the name of Nina Hess. She was a lithe-looking young woman with short brown hair and cheerful golden eyes. Her lack of curves did not take away from the massive following she'd gained online and the numerous suitors whom she'd rejected. She was a B-rank blessed who was chosen by Medusa. Next to get out of the limousine was a pale woman with waist-length, blonde hair. Her ample but small figure was hidden beneath a leather bodysuit and she had a katana strapped to her back. Her name was Opal, a C-ranked blessed chosen by Bishamontan. There he is. It's really him. Yeah, I love you. Can I have your autograph? When Mal stepped out from the limousine, all attention was diverted to him and rightfully so. He was wearing a classic tuxedo with the jacket draped over his shoulders and his signature black glasses. Everyone immediately became enamored with his choice of outfit as well as the statement it made. Wearing nice attire into gates was a trend started by Morgan Creed himself. It was a way for Blessed to say, I am so powerful I can clear this dungeon in record time and still look damn good. With Morgan already being his favorite blessed, naturally he had to imitate his idol a bit, at least for the first dungeon. Truthfully, Malachi hated wearing suits or any kind of formal clothes. But when he received a suit from the one blessed by Surtur himself, did you think he would refuse? He was so excited to put it on, he would have slept in it had he not been distracted by Say spending the night. As the group moved through the crowd, Malachi gave the fans cheerful smiles and waved as much as he could. At that point, a scent he was extremely familiar with wafted into his nose and his face twisted in surprise, but he tried not to show it. How do you like my gift? Morgan had approached Malachi and offered him a firm handshake. The sudden appearance of his idol refocused him, allowing him to almost forget about that scent from earlier. It's amazing. Thank you so much. Malachi offered the man his sincerest thanks. Never in his wildest dreams did he imagine himself receiving a custom suit from his hero. Morgan offered him a few more words of encouragement before letting Malachi go and offering to go out for a drink to celebrate later. He accepted and he prepared to enter the gate with his party. Since this was his first gate, no one was allowed to know exactly what lay inside. Other than the initial estimate of C rank, the type of monsters inside as well as the environment were to remain a secret. It is a bit of a ritual for the first blessed to go in blind to test their ability to be prepared for anything. Opal, Nina, and Malachi met the cameraman who'd be entering with them. Bill seemed like a nice enough guy who promised not to get in the way, but Opal and Nina gave each other knowing looks as if they'd heard those words too many times to count. With that, Luna offered the group her sincerest words of encouragement. "It's time. Don't embarrass us." "I don't know why I was expecting something better after all this time." Opal rolled her eyes. "Your speeches still need work. Have you ever seen Transformers?" Nina offered. Luna did not understand. What was wrong with her speeches? No one likes to be embarrassed, so shouldn't that be incredibly motivating? "I thought it was fine, boss lady." Malachi smiled. Luna felt her cheeks turn slightly pink when Malachi smiled at her. "Kiss ass. Suck up." Malachi simply shrugged off the insults from his party members and walked toward the gate. "Shall we go?" When Malachi entered the gate, three things immediately caught his attention. The first was the bitter cold. Second, the invigorating feeling of being in night air. Third, was the concerning feeling of being watched. He looked towards the source only to see nothing but glimmering stars in the sky. There was nothing yet, his senses were clearly screaming there was someone there. "Am I just nervous because it's my first gate?" Mal shook of his worries as the rest of his group arrived and took in the scenery. Opal gave him a knowing smirk. "Oh, I bet you're just loving this." Malachi gave her a smile as bright as the stars in the sky. "I think this is a fitting first gate for me, don't you?" "Geez, how does one bastard get so lucky?" Nina found this entire situation absurd. This guy's first gate was in an environment he was strongest in. If they'd wound up in a jungle, she was going to start breaking things. Her first gate was on a beach filled with ravenous sirens, and her power only worked on males. "It is a bit unfair." Opal agreed. "Even if it were the middle of the day, the night is wherever I am. That means home advantage is always mine if I so choose." Malachi gloated. While a true statement, the truth was his control over his powers wasn't that strong yet. Even if he did turn the day into night, it would take up all of his focus and leave him useless. But of course, the people watching on stream didn't know that, and everyone thought he was the coolest blessed imaginable. "This is ridiculous, we just entered and we're already at 500,000 views." Bill was over the moon. "Alright, let's get moving." Nina didn't want to stay in this dark and cold place any longer than she had to. The group began their trek through the desert, yet Malachi was still on edge. That feeling of being watched hadn't left him since he'd entered, and no matter how hard he tried, there was no shaking it off. He was about to ask the girls if they felt anything strange, when suddenly, the earth rumbled and the blessed immediately went on their guard. All around them, sand was parting and giant scorpions were rising up from the ground. "They look off?" Malachi thought. While they looked normal per se, there was a hollowness to their eyes that left him bewildered. "Mal, do you want to take the lead?" Opal asked. It's his first dungeon, of course he's taking the lead. Nina gave Mal a hearty pat on the back. "Careful. If he breaks in here, then Lady Luna will blame us." "Hey Mal, why don't you let your senior take the lead, yeah?" Malachi chuckled at their concerns. "You girls don't need to worry, I don't break that easily." Suddenly Mal's jacket flew open and the dozen glimmering silver knives he had tucked away sprang out. The group watched in awe as Mal controlled the knives expertly. Their trajectory was precise, weaving around the bodies of the scorpions tightly before lopping off their head in a swift motion. With the rapid movement of the blades in the dark, the group felt like they were surrounded by miniature shooting stars. Unreal. I've never seen carnage so pretty. The girls weren't alone, the number of views online had skyrocketed and all of the comments were saying the same thing. Viewers were all completely stunned by the fearsome yet captivating display on their screens. Once every scorpion had been beheaded, Malachi returned his blades to his jacket and breathed a sigh of relief. Honestly, he was more nervous than he'd been letting on, so he was grateful that his first fight had gone off without a hitch. Malachi turned around to face his group only to find them all giving him strange looks. Should we? Why are you all looking at me like that? That was awesome. Bill muttered. I'm pretty jealous of your control. Nina stated. Do you want another girlfriend by chance? Opal asked boldly. Nina promptly elbowed her friend in the ribs. You can't have him. You know Bianca already called dibs. Tisk, lucky bitch. Malachi was about to tell the girls he was more than satisfied with his current girlfriend when he sensed movement behind him. He narrowly managed to dodge a well-placed stab from the tail of a headless scorpion. Activating telekinesis on himself to dodge and gain an aerial view, he frowned deeply when he realized these creatures weren't dead at all. What the hell? He wasn't that familiar with arachnid-type monsters, but he was fairly certain they shouldn't still be able to move after being decapitated. It seemed like all of the other scorpions were recovering as well, and they all rushed at Malachi. He took one look at their thick exoskeleton and realized his knives would never be able to penetrate any other area of their body. He clicked his teeth before his hands began to crackle with black lightning. With a wave, he dropped several large lightning bolts on the backs of the headless creatures. A hole was blown right into the center of their backs, through their underbelly. The creatures shuddered and fell over, seemingly finally dead. Malachi lowered himself to the ground and went to investigate their bodies. Some were still crackling with electricity from his blast, but he ignored that and focused on looking for drops. While he was investigating, the group warily approached him while eyeing the dead scorpions curiously. Never seen insect-type monsters survive after losing their head like that. Opal muttered as she poked at the corpses with her sword. Weren't they pretty aggressive too? They didn't even look at us. Nina added. Mal finally stood up and his expression contained unmeasurable disappointment. None of these things dropped a single item. The girls both looked around and realized he was right. While not every monster dropped loot, in a herd of 20 like this one it was extremely uncommon for nothing at all to drop. It looks like our pretty boy's luck is over. Opal joked. The blonde-haired woman had no idea how right she was when in the next second an earthquake incomparable to the one that came before shook the desert. Hundreds of giant scorpions crawled up from the desert sands and trained their beady hollow eyes on Malachi. What the hell is this? Bill was now trembling horribly. This was supposed to be a simple C-ranked gate. So why the hell did an entire horde of monsters just show up? Viewers were just as confused. Hordes this big usually only showed up in S-rank gates or above. A reassessment of the gate outside proved that it was in fact C-rank, so what was with this absurd amount of enemies? Opal and Nina immediately became alarmed and drew their weapons. Malachi's nerves were going mad. There were so many enemies and their only focus seemed to be on taking his head off. To make matters worse, there was this strange energy he could feel that was making his senses go haywire. Mal, look out. Thanks to Opal's sudden warning, Malachi was able to pull himself out of his own mind long enough to see the 4 large stingers aimed directly at his back. He avoided them with ease, but did not anticipate the venom that was dripping from them would be corrosive. A single drop landed on his shoulder and burned a hole in his suit before traveling directly to his skin. Damn it. He ground his teeth in pain before he took a giant leap back towards the group. Are you okay? Nina had a worried look on her face. I'm fine. Truthfully, Mal was really annoyed. So much so that his animal instincts had begun to emerge, causing his teeth to sharpen. I need you guys to stay behind me, alright? Malachi suddenly thought of a crazy idea, but he wasn't sure if he had the control or the necessary power. Mal, we can't let you dash. Lady Luna would kill us if dash. Just do it. Mal roared and the girls could now see his lengthened canines and his orange eyes that were now glowing too brightly to be hidden by sunglasses. The girls meekly nodded and formed a tight circle behind Mal, waiting for his next action. Here goes nothing. Malachi breathed in deep and summoned as much of his power as he could use at the moment. As soon as Luna saw that 3 of her guild members were surrounded, she wasted no time and jumped right into the portal. Upon being immersed in the cool desert air, she sprinted as fast as she was able toward her group. She didn't have any idea how such a large number of beasts could have shown up out of nowhere. All she knew was that she had to get her people out alive. After a few moments of running at her full speed, she finally caught sight of the herd of giant scorpions. She prepared to launch an attack to cause a distraction, only to learn that her help was far from needed. With a loud boom, the night suddenly became as bright as day when walls of golden flame sprang up. The flames flickered violently before they took on a life of their own and came down upon the numerous scorpions like crashing waves. As soon as the flames made the slightest bit of contact with the scorpions, their entire bodies were enveloped in flame. Scree! The pained wails of the giant insects lasted no more than a few seconds before the rabid flames burned them to ash. The flames did not halt their advance until every one of the beasts were nothing more than large piles of ash. How did he even? Luna stared bewildered at the scene before her. The army she was sure would require her full power to escape from was decimated entirely. She shook herself free of her stupor and trudged forward to see the condition of her guild members, only to see Nina and Opal checking on a kneeling Mal who was breathing heavily. Just breathe, Mal, it's okay. How did you do that? Malachi spoke through shallow breaths and revealed he was just as surprised as they were. I was only trying to make a wall. I was hoping to buy us some time, but the flames went out of control. What? Luna was so shocked she'd finally made her presence known. Ah, boss lady, you showed up. Were you worried? Mal tried to flash his signature cheeky smile, but because he was currently exhausted, it didn't look nearly as charming. Luna promptly ignored him and asked the burning question on her mind. You annihilated all those monsters. Accidentally? Something like that. Mal weakly nodded. In truth, saying he lost control would be putting it lightly. As soon as the flames became big enough, he felt like he was a toddler trying to walk a grizzly bear. He didn't even know what the flames were doing until they'd finished their meal and disappeared. While Luna was still reeling from Mal's revelation, Opal made an observation that made her headache even worse. Lady Luna. There aren't any drops. Luna looked around and saw that while there were indeed numerous piles of ash, there wasn't a single piece of armor or equipment. This is insane. She felt like her head was going to explode from shock. After much deliberation, she sighed deeply before telling the group their next course of action. That's it, you guys are pulling out of this dungeon. What? Mal and Bill, who were the two to voice their displeasure, looked at each other in confusion. Dude, why are you saying no? We're at 4 million views and climbing. This is beyond viral. Malachi briefly became camera shy when he realized so many people were watching him. However, he shrugged off his shyness and stared directly at Luna. I don't want to give up on my first dungeon. Mal. This is not about giving up. Look around you, this is completely unprecedented. Luna argued. Besides, look at yourself. You barely have the energy to stand. I just need a quick rest and I'll be good as new. Quick rest my ass. Luna could see that she wasn't going to get through to him like this, so she took a deep breath to calm herself before speaking to him in a gentle tone. Say is waiting for you outside, you know? How do you think she'd feel if you died in here due to your stubbornness? The mention of the woman he cared so much about did make him pause, albeit only briefly. She'd be devastated. Mal muttered. He didn't know the details, but he knew Say had a hard life. He didn't want to add any more stress on her already fragile heart. Exactly, so you should dash. But. Mal slowly rose from the ground while struggling to catch his breath. I don't want her to think the man she's chosen to be with is some quitter either. Suddenly a cheeky smirk crossed of his face before he added, besides, what man doesn't want to look cool for the woman he loves? Mal walked forward and stopped only when he was a few inches away from Luna. I can do this, boss lady. Even though Mal's eyes were currently hidden behind his glasses, Luna could still feel them boring into her intensely. She became slightly flustered with him being so close and took a step back while looking for assistance from Opal and Nina. Girls? Would you say something to him? They looked at each other and a look of understanding passed between them. I don't know why, ma'am, but I believe him. As do I. Luna stared at the two girls as if they'd just grown second heads. She decided they'd been brainwashed by Malachi's charm and elected to use a different set of tactics to get them to come home. Girls, there aren't any drops here. That means you won't be able to get any new equipment or weapons. The way it worked was a party that entered a gate would sort out the weapons or armor that dropped when a monster was killed amongst themselves. It was usually a blessed's favorite part of entering a gate. The items that could be obtained possessed various strange powers and abilities and could augment the strength of their wilder even further than normal. They could also be bought online or through special auction houses, but none of the truly worthwhile items ever made it outside of the hands of who originally found them. Well, we haven't done much so far, so none of that stuff would be ours anyway. Nina nodded in agreement and Luna rubbed her temples. These damned kids. Sometimes, the job of a guildmaster is a lot like babysitting. Damn it, fine. Luna finally growled and gave up. She grabbed Malachi by his collar and pulled him in close. Every single one of you better come back alive or I will pull you from Anubis realm myself. Malachi nodded furiously. Luna was currently very intense, but he found himself realizing something he hadn't ever quite paid attention to. Was she always this gorgeous? Malachi knew that Luna was divinely beautiful, but she suddenly had a certain charm that made her looks truly captivating. Luna released Malachi with a light shove and started walking away. Hurry and kill the boss. Yes, ma'am. The group watched Luna's back disappear and Malachi finally dropped his tough act and sat cross-legged on the ground. Huh, can we rest here for 10 minutes? Pfft, sure Mal. Opal chuckled before coming to sit down right next to him. Nina followed her lead and Bill warily sat down opposite Mel since we have a free moment. Think I could get an exclusive interview? But Mel could no longer hear him and soon his light snoring was heard. Exactly 10 minutes later, he opened his eyes with renewed energy. When Luna exited the portal, the first thing she saw was a red-eyed Say. I'm sorry, I couldn't. It's fine. Say smiled. It's true that I'm worried but I want to believe in the man that I love. Only then did Luna notice that Say's hands were trembling and her palms were sweating. She gingerly took her hand and offered her a kind smile. We'll wait for him together, yeah? An idea briefly bubbled up in Say's mind before she smiled and agreed. Surely she doesn't, but if she did. I think that if it was her, I would not mind. This is bullshit. Nina was staring at an almost fully recovered Malachi. Even though there was still some faint fatigue, he was incomparable to the walking corpse he was before. Nina's shock was an appropriate response. Normally a blessed overusing their powers would put them on their ass for the rest of the day. Yet after Mal's brief 10-minute nap, he was brimming with energy. He wasn't certain, but he got the feeling he was drawing strength from the night itself and using that energy to recover his stamina. I give up. I cannot allow you to shock me anymore, I feel like my brain is going to explode. Isn't he just incredible? Opal was staring at Mal hungrily and he was beginning to feel like she could see through his clothes. I can't believe I only filmed him sleeping for 10 minutes and we're up to 15 million viewers. Bill was certain he'd be getting a raise after this. Malachi rolled his eyes at all the attention he was getting. Come on guys, let's just get going. Who made this rookie the leader? Nina thought, but she followed behind him all the same. I love a commanding man. Opal was imagining some very dangerous scenarios as she trailed behind Malachi. As the group trekked throughout the desert, they didn't run into any more scorpions. There were some rare materials to be collected by the extraction team later, but there were no more monsters and most importantly, no drops. Do you think you killed them all back there? Nina asked after realizing they'd been walking around unimpeded for about 20 minutes now. Malachi tried to use his sight enhanced by the night, but because the scorpions were below ground to begin with, he had no way to know if they were there. What he could see though, was the boss and they just so happened to be coming upon her right now. Lounging sleepily in a large sand basin was a captivating monster. From the waist up, she was a beautiful woman with richly tanned skin, sleek black hair, and 4 red eyes. Her lower half was that of a massive black scorpion, complete with golden markings. She was easily around 13 feet tall. Mal felt his face get hot as he stared at the beautiful monster lady. When Mal noticed that her massive breasts were swaying freely in the wind, he felt like a pervert when his gaze lingered for longer than it should have. Alright Mal, do you have a plan? Huh? Oh right, plan. Suddenly, Malachi was drawing a blank. Even though he was a very smart and reliable person, for the first time in his life he was at a loss for what to do. This was his first dungeon after all. After much deliberation, he finally settled on a plan that was absolutely foolproof. Hit with powers, make fall down? His joke of a plan only earned a smack from Nina and a chuckle from Opal. Viewers online also laughed at Mal's attempt to joke even in a dangerous situation, completely unaware that he was actually very serious. Alright guys, here's what we'll do. Nina began. While the group was going over their plan, a seemingly invisible force blew a faint red powder into the face of the sleeping monster. She inhaled the substance in her sleep, and it wasn't long before her four eyes flashed open, strained with power. Aya. The group's planning was interrupted by the scorpion woman's roar that shook the desert sands. What the hell? Her oars exploded. At first glance, it was easy to see that what was formerly a C rank boss had somehow jumped to B rank. Nina. The sand. Malachi yelled. Got it. Nina quickly threw her hands down and the sand underneath them began to rapidly harden and change into concrete. Since a bit of the boss's legs were submerged under the sand, the resulting attack left her stuck. That won't hold. Nina was already sweating and felt like she was going to go mad under the strain of trying to keep the monster subdued. Use those flames, now. Malachi hurriedly obliged, and witching the next second, his hands produced bright golden flames. He shot them directly at the trapped boss monster, only to be briefly surprised when he did not feel them going wild as he did before. The surprises didn't stop there. When the boss saw the volley of flames coming towards her, she held up her giant pincers and blocked the blow. Raraewa. The boss seemed to feel some pain, but it was nothing compared to the absolute incineration inflicted upon her children earlier. When the volley of flames ceased, the group could see the boss's partially melted claws, but were shocked when she simply used her upper human hands to rip off her pincers. The blessed watched in abject horror as she promptly grew new pincers in the blink of an eye. Bang! The beast finally broke free of the stone encasing her legs and wasted no time leaping out of the sand dune on top of the group. Malachi, unwilling to miss the opportunity to strike his airborne opponent, let loose a volley of black lightning from his hands. The results proved to be even less effective than the flames as the monster simply smirked, indicating she felt no pain at all. Boom! The beast crashed to the ground and immediately began flailing out her extra appendages, intending to strike or impale all of the intruders before her. Opal was knocked aside and coughed up a mouthful of fresh blood. Nina was almost pierced but narrowly avoided the strike from a jagged leg. Malachi's reaction was the fastest, as he had time to avoid the blow and still get Bill back to a safe distance. Opal drew her katana and Nina drew her weapons as well, a pair of large sleek magic pistols modeled after a character from an anime that Aisha had shown her. Nina shot off a few rounds but most were blocked by the enemy's hard exoskeleton and the few that weren't unfortunately did not penetrate deep enough to cause any real damage. Opal coated her sword in vibrant blue energy before she rushed forward and began to attack the beast. She barely managed to avoid incoming pincers, legs, and the pointed tail that was launched at her and counter-attack with her own blows. Like Nina's, they were shallow and hardly effective. Seeing his teammates working so hard, Malachi endeavored to follow in their footsteps. He summoned all of his knives and left them rotating around him before he quickly coated each with black lightning. Launching the blades at an imperceptible speed, his efforts proved not to be in vain. The blades weaved around the beast's body expertly and like all of the attacks before them, they were not sharp enough to leave any deep cuts. One blade, however, was propelled directly into one of the beast's 4 red eyes. A sickening squelch was heard, before the electricity on the blade shocked her from the inside out. Scree! The beast held in pain as the most substantial wound so far had just been dealt. That's great, Mal, keep going. I'll reward you later if you get us out of here alive. He ignored the praises of the two girls and only stared at the beast in front of him. When the boss realized which human inflicted that grievous injury upon it, it snarled before rushing forward with a speed that was comparable to some A-rank bosses. Fast. Mal barely had time to react as he narrowly dodged a blow from a massive pincer. Unfortunately, Mal forgot about her tail and that proved to be the perfect opportunity for her to smack him with it, sending him flying across the sand. Malachi. Both girls rushed forward, only to receive similar heavy blows that produced loud cracking noises. The boss ignored the two groaning women and focused its eyes on the human male in front of it. It had to pay for inflicting a harmful injury on her divine body. She would eat him to help heal the damage he had caused. Mal groaned as he looked up and saw the beast slowly approaching. He recognized the look in her eyes, and a bestial anger bubbled up in his heart. She's looking at me like I'm prey? Me? Such a thing could not be allowed to stand. He was the apex predator here, and there was no one above him. Unbeknownst to Mal, his body was undergoing a transformation to suit his current needs. His skin turned completely black before it became tough like old leather and dark claws burst from his fingertips. His muscles exploded, and his body grew at such a rapid rate that he tore through his clothes with ease. He needed more than to be a beast at the moment. He needed the best aspects of both. Only the combination of both of his natures would allow him the satisfaction of feeling his enemy's bones crunch between his teeth. The boss seemed to recognize that her prey was going through some sort of metamorphosis, and it made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Malachi rose up from the ground and an apex predator was revealed. The only thing left of his clothes was his dark suit pants, which had long since started tearing at the bottoms. His feet had torn through his nice leather shoes and changed into massive dark paws. He was already tall at 6 feet 5 inches, but currently he was a staggering 7 feet 3 inches. His handsome face had shifted and contorted until all that remained was the head of a giant panther, its gaze unflinching and uncompromising. Ruoa error. The boss took several steps backwards as it stared at a transformed Malachi. While she was still physically larger than him, his body radiated an aura that made her feel small and helpless. His body that was covered in sleek black fur did nothing to hide his explosive muscles that were packed with power. Seeing his prey attempting to flee triggered Mal's instincts as a predator, and before the boss knew it, Mal was on the hunt. In a frightening burst of speed, he appeared directly in front of the boss and placed his large clawed hands on her pincers. With another blood-curdling roar, he ripped the beast's appendages from her body. Scree! The beast forgot about fleeing as it became enraged that it had once again been injured and decided to fight back. She launched a flurry of deadly thrusts from her poison-tipped tail, only for Mal to effortlessly sidestep them as if she were moving in slow motion. When he grew tired of playing around, he spun the 2 claws around in his hands before stabbing them into the stomach of the woman they came from. Hot blood flowed as she screamed in pain, the metallic scent of it was enough to drive his instincts even wilder. An unfathomable hunger welled up inside of him. Unable to control it, before he knew what he was doing, he'd leapt on top of the still reeling creature and taken a large bite into her neck. Delicious, delicious. Not only was the meat perfectly fatty and delectable, there was an energy in her body that was being transferred to Malachi and strengthening his body. The boss stumbled and fell backwards as its vision began to darken. It struggled with the last of its meager strength to push the beast on top of it away, but its efforts proved to be fruitless as Mal continued his ravenous feast and ate the beautiful monster. Finally, a flash of golden light appeared and 3 items appeared in its place. A ring, a pair of boots, and a black sword. Holy shit, he did it! Bill had gotten the entire battle on film and the stream of over 30 million viewers was abuzz. Hearing the voice of another human was enough to send a shock to the brain of Malachi, and he immediately froze. He slowly stood up from the corpse and walked over to check on Nina and Opal. The 2 girls had a broken arm and cracked ribs, respectively, but as blessed, those injuries weren't anything to worry about. They were already sitting up and groaning as they stared at a still transformed Malachi. Congrats on your first dungeon clear, kiddo. I'd kiss you for saving us, but you don't look very friendly at the moment. Malachi merely rolled his orange eyes and helped the girls get to their feet. He wasn't allowed to change back just yet because Opal was rather intrigued by his transformation and wanted to take a few pictures. Meanwhile, Nina collected the drops and brought them all to Malachi. Here, these are rightfully yours. HM? We all fought the boss together, didn't we? So why would I alone get the drops when there's enough to share? Malachi asked. Are you kidding? Nina stared at him in shock. You're the only one who did anything substantial. While that may have been true, Malachi was not a greedy person. He approached Nina and took 2 items from her hand, the ring and the sword, leaving her with only the boots. Hey, you forgot, dash. Malachi just ignored her and walked towards Opal and handed her the large black sword. She stared at him in confusion before he held up his ring with a sense of satisfaction. Since they're my items, naturally I can do what I want with them, right? And I want you girls to keep them as mementos. He was certain that the sword would have gone to waste with him since he had no interest in learning how to wield one, and the boots weren't quite his style either. Leaving the girls no room to refuse, he began to walk towards the exit. Let's hurry guys, we only have 3 hours before this thing closes. When Malachi exited the portal, the cheers of applause were deafening. That was so awesome. You're my hero. Those flames were so cool. The compliments from the crowd filled his eardrums, and Malachi truly could not understand it. He didn't think he'd ever look less heroic than he did right now. His transformation had ripped through his clothes, leaving him bare-chested and with tattered pants. Is this how Bruce Banner feels? Suddenly, a group of people approached him and he smiled when he recognized each one. Luna, Say, Aisha, Aubrey, and Morgan were all walking forward to congratulate him on the conquering of his first gate. He was surprised when Say rushed forward to hug him in front of everyone with tears streaming down her face. Did I make you worry? He chuckled. Say's only response was to pinch him as hard as she could. Even though he was being assaulted, he couldn't help but find her antics incredibly cute. He tilted her head up and planted a firm kiss on her lips, and the crowd went wild. Ever since that picture had been circulating online a few weeks ago, the whole world had been clamoring to find out who the woman was, and now it looked like they had their answer. The sounds of camera flashes filled the air as everyone wanted to get a picture of the loving couple. In the back of the crowd, Mel's ex-girlfriend, Melanie, was watching with a hurt expression. Even if she somewhat expected this, it still broke her to see. She knew what she'd done was unforgivable, but she walked away silently wishing that Mel knew the full story. After the pair broke their kiss, Malachi held a blushing Say in his arms as he accepted congratulations mixed with snide comments from Aisha and Aubrey. You did pretty good for a newbie. Aisha smirked. In truth, he was exemplary, but she didn't want him getting too full of himself like so many rookies do. Hey bro, you almost died a lot, you should write a will and leave me all the money just in case. Aubrey joked. Malachi rolled his eyes and silently wondered if he should mention to Aubrey that even if he died, there was no way in hell Aisha would let her want for anything. My friend, that was truly impressive. Morgan was stunned. From beginning to end, Malachi had never given up even when faced with seemingly insurmountable odds. Even when Morgan was younger and more hot-blooded than he is today, he never would have been that courageous. Ah. Well, I'm a bit disappointed I ruined the gift you gave me. Malachi honestly replied. I wanted to be like you a bit. Morgan looked at the young man who fought fiercely before shaking his head and patting his shoulder. You don't have to be like me, Mel, you're going to be so much better. Malachi felt the urge to smile stupidly when he heard such genuine praise from his idol. Really, was there anything that could make this moment better? If you and the lady are interested, would you like to have dinner with my wives and I to celebrate? Morgan offered. It just got better. Before Malachi got too excited, he looked down at a still blushing Say in his arms. Would you like to go? Say could naturally tell that Mel was trying to rein in his excitement, but his eyes not hidden by his glasses were extremely telling. He can be so cute sometimes. Say smiled inwardly. I would be honored. She bowed politely to Morgan. Come now, it's just dinner. Morgan waved away her polite gesture. And of course you all are invited as well. He said, gesturing to Aisha, Aubrey, and even Luna. Aisha and Aubrey looked at each other briefly before Aisha spoke. We actually have plans already. Malachi raised a brow at this, but he did not comment. Luna thought a bit and she really had nothing better to do than stay at home and play with her magical beast. I will accept your invitation. Luna nodded. Wonderful. Morgan seemed to be truly excited. Then I'll send a car to pick you all up from Malachi's house at 8. With that, he waved goodbye to the group and prepared to head home. What sort of plans do you two have? Malachi hurriedly activated protective Big Brother mode as soon as Morgan departed and directed it at Aisha. It's just dinner. Aisha hated the knowing look she was currently getting from Malachi. Oh? Well, you could have just had dinner with us, don't you think? Malachi prodded. Aisha got us reservations at a really nice restaurant. Aubrey smiled. Malachi wanted to be more upset, but it truly has been a long time since he'd seen her be so carefree. Aisha was getting his sister to smile more and more every day, it seemed like. Fine, but you can only go on one condition. Malachi said sternly. Which is? Aubrey asked curiously. Malachi pointed at Aisha and said, you better eat until her wallet is empty. Pfft, sure. After that, the group separated a bit. Malachi was bombarded with questions from interviewers about his first gate, but also with questions about Say. The two quickly became uncomfortable with all of the attention, so Malachi hurriedly lifted her up and flew away with her in his arms. Just because he didn't want to hide, didn't mean he was some attention whore. He just wanted to live his life as himself. Luna gave hugs to both Opal and Nina and told them she was glad they were safe before she went and spoke to the mining team in charge of excavating resources from the cleared dungeon. Everything about this dungeon is strange, so I want you all to stick together to ensure each other's safety. She ordered. Yes, Lady Luna. The group of around 40 men and women then entered the gate, preparing to search for any magical materials they could find. While the group was entering, no one noticed that amongst the waves of people entering, the portal distorted slightly, indicating a single invisible entity had exited. Luna thought she noticed something strange, but upon closer inspection, she found nothing to be amiss. Her curiosity sated, she soon turned her mind towards a more important issue. What on earth do I even wear? God damn it. Bang. Alex Heller destroyed his desk in a blind rage as he saw the hundreds of thousands of comments online raving about Malachi and his harrowing gate raid. Viewers were enamored with his frighteningly amazing powers as well as his determination to see things through no matter the danger. While there were some online accusing him of being reckless or simply putting on a show for the camera, those comments were few and far between. A knock at the door briefly stifled his rage, but if it was who he expected it to be, he knew he wouldn't be calm for very long. Come in. Celine strode in with a woman wearing dark clothes. I'll order a new desk, she said before she calmly walked out and allowed the two blessed to discuss things privately. I'm almost certain I'll have to call someone to mop her up, she thought as she closed the door. Standing across from Alex was an almost equally famous person who looked like she was ready to be chastised by her mother. Short black hair styled in a pixie cut, bright red eyes that were trembling with fear and a beautiful yet scared face. Her fair white skin was spoiled by what appeared to be two intersecting scars, one running down her left eye, the other across her nose. She was Sierra Caligo, a SS-ranked blessed, a member of True Sky and the woman chosen by Hades. Tell me something, Sierra. When she heard his tone, she felt her whole body tense up in fear. I got you in the gate early. I got you an artifact that lets you turn invisible and conceal your presence. I even gave you that special crystal to empower the boss should all else fail. He slowly approached the trembling woman, his eyes glowing a bluish silver. So tell me, why is Malachi Saint still alive? Sierra hesitated for a moment as she seemingly tried to come up with an acceptable answer. Truthfully, she'd done as much as she could despite the circumstances. She killed all the monsters inside the gate with her telekinesis so as not to leave any visible wounds and raise suspicions. She'd even taken care to mimic their actual behavior and hide them under the sand for an ambush. Her personal undead army was off limits since they were much too recognizable, and with a cameraman their recognition was the last thing they needed. Sierra didn't even finish her sentence before Alex had his hand around her neck and lifted her up into the air. Idiot. An entire army of undead at your command, yet you couldn't kill one fucking rookie? She wanted to say that Malachi's weird flame seemed to be her power's natural weakness as they not only destroyed her undead, they also burned up her energy. Useless. Alex roared and hurled the young woman into the nearest wall. Bang. Her body collided hard with the solid surface, and she fell weakly to the ground while coughing furiously. Suddenly, Alex stomped her head into the ground and ground his heel into her skull. Fucking worm. You whine about wanting to be free from me, but you can't do the one fucking thing I ask of you. Sienna simply held her breath as she tried not to cry. She was seen as a strong, dependable woman by many, and yet she turned into a weak little girl when it came to this man in front of her. All she could do was try not to be even more pathetic by crying. Give me the drops, Alex ordered as he removed his shoe from her head. Sienna shakily took out a golden storage ring that was filled with various items that rightfully belonged to Immortal Moon. So you can do some things right. Alex snorted in contempt and began to walk away. He stopped at the ruined remains of his desk where he picked up his tablet that was still open to the latest news articles about Malachi. He picked it up and scrolled angrily throughout several stories that were all saying the same thing before he stopped as he saw a photo of Malachi and a beautiful woman. It's a shame, an entire guild under my control, and yet I have to do everything by my goddamn self. Tossing the tablet to a slightly recovered Sierra, he gave her another set of orders. Find out everything you can about that woman, and try your damnedest not to fuck that up too. He growled. Sierra swallowed and took the tablet before she shakily exited his office. Celine saw the state of the woman when she walked past her to enter the elevator and could not help but raise her brow in surprise. I guess I called the janitor for nothing. Do I really look okay? Say asked nervously. You look great, my dear. Malachi chuckled and gave her a small peck on the cheek. The couple had gone with a bit of a matching theme tonight, with Malachi wearing a black dress shirt and pants with a black and white sweater on top. His signature sunglasses could not hide the love in his gaze as he stared at the woman before him. Say on the other hand was a bit of a frazzled mess, wearing an elegant but simple black, long-sleeved dress that Malachi had bought for her. She wore a glittering pair of golden earrings and her supple lips were coated with a clear and fragrant lip gloss. Her entire outfit was actually bought by Malachi, leaving her to feel slightly guilty. He'd already done so much for her already, she couldn't help but feel undeserving. Thanks to him, or rather his influence, her restaurant was thriving more so than ever before. She'd been able to hire more staff to help out, and more often than not, her restaurant was always full. And now she was being invited to the house of one of the most powerful beings in the world. Seriously, just how much will you spoil me? She looked at him with a happy yet sad gaze. He consistently did so much for her, yet what could she do for him? Mal noticed the sad look on the face of the woman he cared about and quickly pulled her into his arms. What's the matter, did you change your mind about going? He asked calmly. As always, she found herself unable to lie when he asked her a question with such genuine concern in his voice. Even without his blessing active, she would have told him the truth anyway. It's not that. I feel like I do not deserve to be this happy. She snuggled deeper in his embrace, as she finally told him all of her worries and fears. When you first asked me to be with you, I had resigned myself to be thrown away eventually, as I was certain that there was no way someone with a bright future like you would stay with an old woman like me. Say you. Malachi began. But the more time I spend with you, the more I hate the idea that we may have to part one day. She stared at the floor in shame. Malachi did not let her continue and pulled her in for a lingering kiss. The two stayed intertwined like that for a while, before Say broke their kiss by placing her hand on his chest. What was that for? You were being silly. Malachi lightly stroked Say's soft cheek as he gazed at her with tender eyes. Really? How could I not notice she was worried about something like this? He made a silent vow to pay more attention to things like this in the future. I'm not going anywhere, now or in the future. Everything I do for you is because you deserve it, and I know that you would do the same for me. He comforted. But. Ow, ow, ow. Malachi suddenly pulled and stretched Say's cheeks like they were made of Play-Doh. If I hear you speaking negatively about yourself again, I'm going to get upset. He smirked. Okay, I'm showy. She apologized profusely in the hopes that Malachi would cease his assault on her face. Malachi released her face and the two stared into each other's eyes for a long time. Say felt strange inside. Malachi didn't even say much, but all of her worries seemed like they were slowly fading away. Everything she was so concerned with before seemed like such a fantasy. Malachi had never been a disloyal or traitorous person, so why did she expect that to change so suddenly? As if both had the same thought, they leaned in and shared another long kiss that erased the world around them. So much so that the two did not notice the presence of another individual who was staring at them quite intensely. Only when Malachi's hand slipped farther down Say's waist did Luna make her presence known. Guys, I don't think you have time for that. Kya. What the hell? Immediately, the eyes of the couple widened and they nearly jumped out of their skin. Leaning leisurely against the wall was Luna, as sexy and seductive as ever. Contrary to her usual attire, she was wearing dark jeans with sandals and a simple green sweater that hung off her shoulder. Her hair was tied up in a messy bun that gave her a youthful and carefree appearance. Boss lady? How did you even get in here? Malachi asked. Your sister and I ran into each other downstairs, and she gave me the code to the door. Luna said without much thought as she looked at the outfits of Say and Malachi. You two look great, but I think you should change. Luna said. Say and Malachi looked at each other and then back at Luna and finally noticed her outfit. I'm sure he just was so excited he forgot to mention it, but Morgan has a very particular hobby. Luna said. What kind of hobby? The couple asked in unison. In front of an extremely large mansion, a long black limousine rolled to a stop. Morgan Creed's home was the definition of exorbitant. When Malachi and Say stepped out from the car, they could not close their mouths. Even though Malachi now had $1 billion in the bank, he was slowly remembering the feeling of being poor. Say's brain had nearly stopped working completely. She was certain that even if she worked 10 lifetimes, she could only afford to buy the 2 statues at the front door. Luna got out of the car and took one look at their reactions before shoving them lightly. "Are the 2 of you really so awed by little things like this?" she asked. There's nothing little about this. This is insane." Suddenly Malachi paused and sniffed the air and realized what Luna had told him was indeed true. "Holy hell, you weren't joking." Say seemed to notice it as well, and her eyes took on a strange glimmer of excitement. "Aren't you glad you changed?" Luna teased. They both nodded furiously. Currently Mal was wearing simple black jeans and a collared shirt while Say was wearing a yellow sundress. "If you'll follow me please." The driver led the group to the door where he promptly rang the doorbell and a choir could be heard. "This is really too much money," Malachi muttered, and Say nodded absent-mindedly in agreement. Luna found Mal's innocence to be quite cute and wondered what his reaction would be if she brought him to her house. Why am I suddenly thinking about something so weird? Her cheeks turned a slight shade of red as she pushed her thoughts of showing him her bedroom out of her mind. Suddenly, the large wooden doors opened and standing there was a beautiful woman with waist-length black hair and vibrant green eyes. "You guys made it." She had a bright and cheerful voice that matched her pristine white smile. "Indeed we did, Amelia." Luna politely smiled back. Even though she could be a bit cold to most people, the woman in front of her was simply far too likable. Come in, come in." She hurriedly stood aside and allowed entry to the group. "You must be the famous Malachi and Say I've heard so much about." The pair were slightly floored by how kind this woman was. Malachi was considered by many to be a pretty nice guy, but this woman in front of him was like pure unfiltered joy. "I'm Amelia Creed, Morgan's first wife, and it's so nice to meet you." She introduced herself politely and stuck out her hands for a polite handshake from both. "It's nice to meet you as well." Malachi smiled. "Yes, thank you for having us," Say said. "Well, come on, let me show you to the backyard." She then led the group through the house, and the couple once again was stunned by all of the expensive things they saw. One-of-one paintings, diamond chandeliers, marble ceilings, and more. Soon they were led to an enormous field of grass behind the house that resembled more of a farm than someone's backyard. "Dear, they're here." Amelia waved. Standing over a large black grill wearing an apron that said, "Kiss the Chef," was one of the most powerful blessed in the world, Morgan Creed. He waved the group over and immediately clasped Malachi on the shoulder. "You guys finally arrived. I hope you brought your appetites." It was then that he gestured to the grill in front of him, allowing Malachi and Say to get a good look at the hobby Luna had told them about. "I wasn't sure exactly what you guys liked, so I made a bit of everything." He scratched his cheek in embarrassment. Gorgeously roasted chicken, succulent ribs, and even a few grade-A steaks were all present and looked to have been cooked to perfection. "Well, are you guys ready to eat?" "Alright guys, please enjoy." Morgan Creed gestured to the large table of food in front of him with a pleased expression. There wasn't just meat available, there was a few side dishes, prepared by Morgan's second wife, Crystal. Currently the group was seated at a large hand-carved wooden table. Morgan was sitting between his 2 wives on one side, meanwhile Malachi was sitting on the other between Luna and Say. While Luna seemed like she expected at least this much, Malachi and Say stared at the mountain of plates in front of them in awe. Say was especially shocked since, as a chef herself, she could tell the amount of dedication and care that went into each dish. Luna did not stand on ceremony and instead started piling her plate with food, the couple next to her not far behind. Morgan watched with bated breath as his guests tried their first morsels of food. In the next moment, the glimmering eyes of the young couple seemed to shine bright enough to light up the night sky. "It's so good." "Ha ha ha. Thank you for the compliment." Morgan's face twisted into a proud grin. "See dear, they're enjoying it, so you can eat as well now." Crystal smirked. She knew her husband would never begin eating unless he was certain their guests were totally satisfied. I suppose I can." He nodded. For a while, the group made pleasant small talk over their delicious dinner. At first, they discussed the strangeness of Mal's first dungeon, with everyone trying to come up with their individual guesses on the matter. Next they asked Malachi questions about his powers, and he tried to answer to the best of his ability through his mouthfuls of food. The evening was going well until Crystal made a comment that caused Mal to choke on his steak. "So, you aren't just dating Miss Say here, but Lady Luna as well?" Amelia guessed. Pardon?" Oh my. The raven-haired woman looked at the reactions of her guests and tilted her head in confusion. Morgan let out an impressed whistle and raised his glass to Malachi. Pretty damn impressive, kiddo. I had no idea. In truth, Morgan was beyond impressed. The number of suitors who'd tried to get under Luna's kimono was as long as the amount of stars in the sky. However, much like the goddess who blessed her, she was as unreachable as the moon itself. He wasn't surprised they'd be keeping their relationship a secret. He could only imagine the amount of bitter men who'd try to make life hard for Malachi or those around him. Though seeing him in that dungeon today, I wager they wouldn't be able to do much. We most certainly are not in a relationship. Luna cried. That's right. Malachi looked back and forth between Emilia and Say. I swear I don't know what she is talking about. He pleaded. Surprisingly, Say did not look bothered and only showed a small cute smile. Malachi did not know if that was the smile women used when they found something adorable or the one they used before they killed their partners. Just to be safe, he moved the sharp steak knife she'd been using out of reach. Oh, the two of you aren't together then? Morgan and his wives asked. Emilia usually had a pretty good nose for these kinds of things, so they just assumed her words to be true. No, we are not. Malachi was panicking internally and Luna's cheeks were as red as the lotus tattoo on her forehead. May we ask why? Morgan and his wives were not going to let this subject go. I already have a girlfriend. He is my subordinate. Hearing their reasoning, the trio became even more confused as they looked at each other. So? What do you mean so? Morgan sighed before giving Mal a weary look. Surely you must know that as blessed we are allowed to take an additional 2 spouses. Many have more on the side. His choice of words seemed to earn him a death glare from his wives, and he quickly cleared his throat to profess that he didn't condone it himself. While Malachi was aware of the laws surrounding blessed in this country, he never thought much of it. He still didn't know quite how attractive he'd become, so for him, just having one super hot older girlfriend was a dream come true. He then turned to Luna, and what does it mean if he's your subordinate? Emilia was my secretary and Crystal was my head maid. That information made Luna suddenly feel like she was having dinner in the Playboy mansion. I don't mind. Say suddenly spoke. Come again? Malachi was stunned. You don't? Luna cried. Both stared at the giggling woman like she'd just said the most unbelievable statement imaginable. Well, before I might have been worried, but... The woman took a deep breath as if to illustrate that her next words would come from the depths of her soul. I know now that you will not abandon me. I want you to be happy even if I am not the only one to make you that way. She looked past Malachi and flashed to stunned Luna a warm smile. Besides, I think you are a good person who would not try to monopolize him. So if you wish to be with him as well, I will not complain. At her speech's end, silence rang out across the dining table. Morgan and his wives put on a satisfied expression. They all thought that Malachi had been blessed with 2 very good women. Doing what Say had just done wasn't easy, and Emilia and Crystal knew that from experience. Yet here she was, ready and willing to sacrifice a bit of her happiness so that Malachi might have more, and by extension, Luna as well. Her eyes contained no ulterior motives or hidden malice. She truly just wanted the best for both of them. Luna and Malachi could only sit there and stare at the woman in shock. So Mel, what do you say? Do you like Luna? Emilia asked with a glimmer in her bright green eyes. In college, she was the designated matchmaker for all of her friends. She'd never failed to spot the potential of a couple before, and she wouldn't start now. Malachi was still reeling from Say's sudden permission and was completely at a loss for what to say. He already had one super hot older girlfriend and now she was telling him he could have 2. Just the thought alone was enough to make him cream his jeans. Suddenly he saw Luna staring at him out of the corner of her eyes and got a first-hand reminder of just how beautiful the woman was. With a red blush on her soft white cheeks, she was even cuter and Malachi found her practically irresistible. It wouldn't be a stretch to say that she was every man's dream woman. Strong, dependable, gorgeous and accomplished. And even though she hardly showed it, Malachi knew that she hid some softer sides deep inside as well. Plus she was older than him. She was checking all of his boxes. Other than Say, he could not imagine a more perfect woman for him. From the moment he first laid eyes on her, he'd been drawn to her. Only now was he realizing that what he felt was romantic interest. I do. Malachi said after much internal debate. His words seemed to send Luna into a spiral as her face finally reached an unhealthy shade of red. Morgan and his wives all had satisfied smiles before they turned to Luna. And you? Do you hold any special feelings for Malachi? Crystal asked Luna. For the first time in a long time, Luna began to panic internally. She'd just come to eat barbecue and make conversation. Now she was under interrogation about her love life. She felt like she was right back at her parents' house. Feeling like she was rapidly losing control of the situation, Luna did several mental calculations and finally found a light at the end of the tunnel. Her cold, businesslike demeanor had returned and she had a sudden air of indifference about her. Honestly, I don't know what you think, but unlike your husband, I don't see my subordinates as potential romantic suitors. She rose up from her seat and prepared to walk away. I don't have any interest in Malachi whatsoever. She turned to leave and was about halfway towards the door when she felt Malachi suddenly grab her wrist. Are those your true feelings, Luna? Whether it was his blessing from Bast, or the fact that he'd called her by her name for the first time, who can say? All Luna knew was that in front of this man who was almost half her age, she found herself completely unwilling and unable to lie. No. They aren't. Luna's voice contained an untouched tenderness that led Morgan to believe he drank too much. Was this truly the Guildmaster of Immortal Moon? Sounding like some frail maiden in love? What the fuck was happening in his dining room? Luna's eyes widened when she realized that she'd accidentally said her true feelings out loud. Something inside of Luna broke and she suddenly ripped her hand away from Malachi before turning tail and running out of the door. Malachi of course wanted to chase her, but there was something about that look of fear in her eyes that left his feet firmly planted in the ground. Say's eyes held a mysterious knowing light as she watched Luna run out of the door, seemingly understanding everything and yet saying nothing. After that night, Luna had taken great care to avoid Malachi to the best of her ability. Even when the guild just so happened to have meetings, she never allowed him to get close to her for even a moment. Currently, Malachi was in class absent-mindedly listening to his professor's lecture. After Malachi's dungeon raid aired on TV, he never bothered to say anything about Malachi's glasses again. I guess I should go visit Rowan after I leave here. He hadn't seen the old man in a few days, and he was quite curious whether he could help him master more of his abilities. He hadn't forgotten Regent's warning about there being worse things to come, so he wanted to be prepared for the inevitable struggle. I wonder, were others warned as well? He wondered before his exhaustion caught up to him and he slowly dozed off. Malachi eventually woke up to the gentle sensation of someone nudging his shoulder. Before he'd even opened his eyes, he knew exactly who was in front of him. Hey, just because you get straight A's doesn't mean you can fall asleep in class. Malachi looked up to see Melanie standing above him with a sympathetic expression. This isn't like you, are you all right? She asked. Malachi groggily looked around and saw that they were the only ones present in the classroom. Yeah, I'm fine. Melanie correctly guessed what he was looking at and immediately explained. I think everyone else might have been too scared to wake you. Scared? Mel muttered. He soon remembered that the entire world had seen him turning into a giant 7-foot beast and figured that explained the sudden apprehension of his classmates. Well, I should be going, take care of yourself. Mel watched her walk away and head towards the door. He prepared to call out to her and thank her for waking him when he saw something that made his blood run cold. Brief flashes of dark black bruises could be seen on Melanie's slender, pale arms. Please go leave a review if you like the book or have any ideas you'd like to see incorporated. Malachi dragged his feet as he approached Rowan's farm. The image of Melanie's bruises had seemingly burned themselves into his mind, giving him an even greater headache than the one he'd already possessed. He'd kept trying to tell himself that he'd been mistaken, that what he'd seen was some sort of trick of the light. No matter how many times he'd told himself that, it didn't change what he already knew. Melanie was being abused, and Malachi was certain he already knew the culprit. It's none of my business anyway. He grumbled. So why am I so bothered? She cheated on me with my fucking boss, for God's sake. Yet I still don't feel like I can turn my back on her. This is bullshit. I'm just not going to think about it anymore. While Malachi no longer held romantic interest in Melanie, that would not change the fact that he was a person with a compassionate heart who could not justifiably walk away from someone he knew being abused. You know, if you have to make that kind of face when you visit, I think I'd prefer you not visit at all. Malachi looked up from his thoughts to see Rowan standing on the porch, cigarette in hand. Sorry old man, it's not because of you. Malachi came to a stop at the bottom of the steps and gestured for the old man to give him a cigarette as well. Rowan obliged him and soon the two were standing side by side, smoking leisurely as they watched the grass blow in the breeze. "Wanna talk about it?" Rowan finally asked. "No," was Malachi's only reply. They sat in silence for a bit longer before Malachi finally made a request. "Can you teach me how to use my flames better?" "The flames of heaven, huh?" Rowan became deep in thought, seemingly trying to recall what he'd read from textbooks and stories. "For a power like that, you don't actually need my help," he said after a long silence. "Pardon? Show me a spark," Rowan asked. Malachi obliged, and a small ball of golden flames were created in his palm. Rowan took a deep breath before he walked towards Malachi and stuck his hand directly into the ball of flames. Hey, what are you doing, you crazy old man?" Malachi jerked his hand back and put his dark gold flames away. Instead of answering, Rowan held his hand up and showed Malachi that it was completely unblemished, showing no signs or damage except for age. "What the hell?" Malachi stared at Rowan in shock. He knew for a fact that his flames burned at over 6,000 degrees. Yet the old man's hand was just fine? The flames of Michael are said to do many things, but they are most famous for being able to burn away beings of sin. Apparently, this old man isn't irredeemable. Rowan chuckled inwardly. They also cannot be held by someone who does not possess a righteous character. He added. These words caused Malachi to smile inwardly, and he began to feel a little relieved. "Come on, let's work on your control." The old man walked towards the barn with a lightness in his steps that wasn't there before. Knowing that the main weapon of the strongest archangel in heaven did not consider you to be a malicious person has its ways of easing the burdens on the soul. Malachi followed closely behind, and soon the two were embroiled in another taxing training session. Currently, Luna was sitting at her desk and going through a stack of papers. She'd been working harder than normal lately in an effort to distract herself from certain events, and it appears to have been successful. She'd finished up work she'd been days behind on in only a single night. The only problem was, now she had run out of things to do, and as a result, she had no distractions. Gods, I miss being able to get drunk. She sighed before she leisurely leaned back into her chair and gazed up at the ceiling. She took out an item from her pocket and stared at it with a forlorn expression. This was Malachi's ring he'd gotten from his first gate. He'd given it to her to be analyzed, and she had yet to return it to him. I really don't want to see that kid again. Luna sighed internally. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door and Aisha entered without even waiting for a response. Luna was much too tired to care by this point, so she didn't even chastise her as she usually would. She simply sat up in her chair and leisurely tossed Malachi's ring to her. Perfect timing, you can deliver that to Mal. Aisha caught the ring and looked at it suspiciously. What's it do? It's an invisibility ring. Luna replied flatly. Aisha let out an impressed whistle. Pretty decent drop for a first-timer. Indeed. The white-haired girl put away the ring and walked closer to her boss's desk. Is there something going on with you and Malachi? She asked. That question seemed to be one Luna suspected, and she showed no signs of being caught off guard. No, there isn't. Are you sure? Seems like you've been avoiding him for some weird reason. Aisha prodded. Seems like you have a bit too much free time if you can worry about something as trivial as this. Luna poked back. Aisha finally relented and she sighed before walking towards the door. I don't know what's going on, but she never asks me for favors, so it must be something serious. She who? Luna asked. Aisha did not answer and instead opened the door to reveal Say standing outside timidly. She's all yours, I hope you'll tell me what this is all about later. Say politely bowed to show her thanks. I will, thank you Aisha. Say entered the room and Aisha closed the door behind her, leaving only Luna and Say alone to talk. What are you doing here? Luna asked warily. I'm sorry for the intrusion. Say once again bowed apologetically. But I felt I had to talk with you. Luna sighed as she could already guess where this conversation was going. Look, I am far too busy to talk about nonsense. I don't know why I said that to Mal at dinner, but my guess is it was just the wine. You can't get drunk. Say reminded her. Then I was high. You don't smoke, and nothing is strong enough to dash. Alright, fine. Luna finally had enough and stood up in frustration. I said it alright? But I have no interest in being with that brat, okay? Say put on a sad smile and she moved to sit on one of the couches in Luna's office. I don't think that's true. I think you are just afraid to be vulnerable. Luna scoffed. What would you know? Say took a deep breath and then showed her a warm smile. I know, because I was the same. I should probably tell you about my ex-husband. Say finally said. Luna stared at the woman in front of her for a long time. She could kick her out, but so far this woman had been nothing but kind to her. Plus, in this moment, Say seemed to be quite fragile. Even though she was trying to hide it, Luna could smell the sweat pooling in her palms. With a sigh, she sauntered forward and sat on the couch opposite Say. Talk. Like Luna, Say was originally born in Japan. She was the oldest daughter of a very wealthy and prominent family. She was seen by her family as a diligent, obedient child who excelled at whatever she tried her hand at and was her parents' pride and joy. When she entered adolescence, Say gained a mesmerizing beauty to match her divine talent. Simply saying she had a large amount of suitors would be a gross understatement. Boys were lining up in droves to gain her affections, yet only one was so lucky. A young man that Say met in an after-school club turned out to be her first love. They spent lots of time together, laughing, discussing common interests, and even studying together. Eventually, the pair sought to enter into an official courtship and went to Say's parents for their approval. Surely she, who had never asked for anything in her life, would have this one wish granted. Her parents were utterly furious. Their daughter had actually brought home some poor nobody with average looks and ability. They could not allow her to sully their name and reputation. The young couple's request for acknowledgement was denied, and they were forbidden from interacting with each other again. Say was heartbroken, but what could she do? She had never gone against the wishes of her parents before, and she wasn't even sure how. Months went by with each day seeming more and more bleak than the last. The boy she fell in love with had stopped coming to school entirely, and she hadn't seen him in months. Her life that was once so beautiful and dreamlike, quickly became a dull wasteland she could not escape from. Then one day, the young man suddenly appeared in front of her once again. He had a large suitcase full of money and 2 plane tickets to America. Apparently he'd been working like mad ever since the two had separated, all in hopes of running away with her and starting a new life together. Say was completely stunned. At only 17, she did not know if she was ready for such a monumental decision as running away. But when she looked at all of the money he had collected, she knew just how hard he'd worked to give them this chance, and she simply couldn't say no. Say went home to collect her passport and pack some clothes, before she left a letter on her dresser explaining her disappearance. She fled in the middle of the night with the boy she'd fallen hopelessly in love with. Arriving in America, things were slightly rocky at first, but the pair were happy. For a while they slept in motels and worked odd jobs to make ends meet when money began to run low, but when Say became pregnant, they knew they would have to take more drastic measures for their future. The man got an apprenticeship at a car garage as a mechanic, and was able to start earning a livable wage in a short time. Say also started working at the restaurant that would be hers in the future. With their new sources of income, the two were finally able to purchase a house and even a car. Their life seemed to be perfect, with many more happy days in front of them. Unfortunately, it did not last. The man soon fell in love with an American woman and ran away to be with her, leaving a heartbroken Say with piles of bills to pay and a child to raise. She called home and begged for her family's forgiveness and to come home, only to be told that a whore who opens her legs for any random man she meets had no place in their lives. So now, Say had no family, no husband, and a child who she desperately needed help raising. Luckily, her boss at the restaurant took pity on her and she invited her to come and stay in her home for as long as she needed. As someone who never had children of her own, she welcomed Say and her daughter with open arms, and Say found herself confiding in the tenderness of a new mother figure. A few years later, her boss passed away from old age. Say and Surana were devastated, but then they discovered the woman had left behind a will containing a small sum of money, the deed to the restaurant and the house they were currently living in. Say was eternally grateful to the old woman for helping her to raise her daughter and giving her a place to go when she had no one. As the years went by, I never interacted with men outside of the restaurant, Say said with a sad expression. I thought I was just uninterested, but eventually I realized that I was just too scared to be vulnerable with anyone else. I couldn't trust anyone, couldn't depend on them either. The one person who consistently helped me has already passed away. Luna stared at Sei as if she were looking at a new woman. She had no idea this kind and gentle woman had such a horrible past behind her. I can tell this is difficult for her to talk about, so why is she going so far? And then Malachi asked to be with me. Sei's downtrodden disposition suddenly turned into a pure warmth as she remembered the man she was dating. Normally, I would have refused immediately. Maybe it was our history, or maybe it was the genuine way that he asked me, but I found myself unable to say no. Despite that, I was determined not to fall in love with him, and I was sure he'd lose his fascination with me sooner rather than later. No matter how handsome he'd become, she shyly added, prompting Luna to roll her eyes even though she inwardly agreed wholeheartedly. But he's so kind and caring. Unlike anyone I've ever known. He's given me everything he possibly could even when I did not deserve it. And even though the entire world is clamoring for his attention, he only gives it to me. I feel special. Luna could not help but remember how Malachi was behaving like he was on cloud nine the day he and Sei began dating. So that's why I was so bothered. Not once has he ever caused me to regret my decision. In truth, I wish I had made it sooner, she giggled. Sei moved to the couch beside Luna and took her hand. I will not pretend to know everything that you have been through, but I do understand what it's like to feel scarred by your past and unable to trust in anyone. I am not asking you to trust in anyone else, just trust him. Luna stared at Sei's soft white hand that was intertwined with hers. Her words were constantly ringing in her mind, telling her that she could be trusting and vulnerable, no matter how hard it seemed. Could she really do that? Would it truly not go horribly wrong? She wasn't certain, but if Sei could try, maybe she could too. All right, kid, you want to do this the easy way or the hard way? Rowan asked Malachi. They'd reached their destination inside of the barn and were standing in the area Malachi usually trained in, a large open space with metal pails opposite him to act as targets. What's the difference? Malachi asked. If we start out hard, you'll have an easier time with simple actions in the future. If we do it the easy way, we'll slowly be able to build up your fundamentals, making sure your power is more concise. Rowan explained simply. Malachi thought long and hard about this decision. The gods had warned him already that more dangerous things would come, so he needed to be prepared. Do I focus on gaining power as fast as possible, or do I have time to learn the fundamentals? He wondered. Which was the right way to go about gaining power? Let's do it the hard way, Malachi said after much debate. Rowan didn't seem to be too surprised by this, it was almost like he'd already expected it. The old man picked up a notebook and a pen and began drawing something with great focus. Make this. He held up his drawing and revealed it to be a flower in mid-bloom. Almost immediately, Malachi wanted to go back to the easy way. He had no idea how to shape his flames, much less into something as complicated as a flower. This is the path you've chosen, do not regret it, do not run from it. Instead, walk proudly into your future. Rowan seemed to sense Malachi's hesitation and tried to give him the words he needed most at the moment. With renewed determination, he cupped his hands together to form a ball of bright gold fire. He began to concentrate intensely, trying to will the ball to change shape. If he doesn't understand after 10 minutes, I'll give him a hint. Rowan pulled up a nearby stool, before sitting down and watching Mal struggle with his powers. 20 minutes later. Mal had tried everything, yet there was absolutely no change. He tried to will it, he tried to beg it, and he even tried to visualize the change step by step. Absolutely nothing worked. Zzzzz. Malachi looked up and saw that Rowan was comfortably sleeping in his chair. This damn old man. He debated on using a small shock to jolt the man awake before ultimately deciding against it. Knowing Rowan didn't sleep much since his daughter passed, he figured he shouldn't ruin this one moment where he could. Malachi once again turned his attention back to his flames as he stared at them in frustration. He never thought once he'd gained all this power that he'd go back to feeling useless. When he recalled the spectacle he'd caused in front of the gods, he found the urge to laugh at himself. Damn it. I can't protect anything like this. Slowly, the worry that his loved ones would perish in front of him began to corrode his mind. Sei, Surana, Luna, and Aisha, as well as all of his friends at the guild. Do I have to lose them all too? Suddenly, the flames in his palm began to flicker in a way that they hadn't before. Malachi became excited and tried to will them to change shape yet again, only to be disappointed when the flames returned to normal. What the hell? They were just starting to work. Suddenly, it was as if a light bulb went off in his head. Protection. Surely the main weapon of an archangel was intended to be used for the defense of others, instead of offensively. With a new theory in his head, Mal closed his eyes and tried to visualize his loved ones. Aubrey. The flames once again began to flicker wildly and turned a faint white. Aisha. The ball of fire began to compress, until it looked like a radiant gold and white ball. Say. The ball of fire slowly began to unfold, until a gorgeous golden lotus flower floated in his hand. Malachi opened his eyes and was immediately assailed by the feeling of sweat running into them. He hadn't realized how taxing using this power was on his body while he was focused, but he'd certainly noticed now. While the level of exhaustion was nothing compared to when he used his blessing from Nyx, it was still nothing to sneeze at. Huh. I really did it. Mal chuckled. He suddenly eyes the targets on the opposite side of the wall and gained an idea. It probably won't be too bad, right? Malachi held out his palm and flicked the fiery lotus towards the center target. He only intended to pulverize the pail. Maybe put a small hole in the wall behind it. But he never intended to unleash the havoc that happened next. Boom. Malachi's flaming lotus, that was no bigger than a fist, exploded upon contact with the pail and destroyed it, and the entire wall behind it. Dust and debris flew, and Malachi hurriedly shielded a now awake and screaming Rowan. Brat. What did you do? I made a flower. The hell you did? What kind of flower pulverizes a wall? The one I made. Malachi ended up getting chewed out for 10 whole minutes before Rowan calmed down. Of course Malachi offered to pay for the damages, and the old man meagerly accepted before sitting back down. So you figured it out, huh? It wasn't easy, but yeah. Malachi wore a small smile of pride. Humph, your training is just beginning, brat. Make 3 more simultaneously and don't throw them. Malachi looked at Rowan as if he'd just ordered him to put his nuts in a blender. Oh, old man, you're joking, right? Rowan's only response was to take a cigarette out of his pocket and stare at Mal like he was waiting. Sinister bastard. Malachi ground his teeth in frustration before he begrudgingly began his task. 2 hours later. Night had fallen and Malachi was currently breathing heavily as he lay on the barn floor. His shirt had long been removed as he was covered in an ungodly layer of sweat that made it uncomfortable. Huff. Huff. I did it though. Malachi stared up in satisfaction at the 3 golden lotus flowers currently rotating above his head. It took a lot of time and even more energy and focus, but eventually he was able to complete the task Rowan assigned to him. Impressive indeed. The old man commented. Truthfully, he was expecting Mal to take a few days to learn how to do this, but instead it was only a few hours. He didn't know if it was determination or just flat-out talent. Go home, kid, get some rest. Rowan finally stood up and began to walk back to his house. Huh. Sure, just let me lay here a minute. Mal replied, but the old man was already gone. Malachi dispersed the golden flowers floating above his head and basked in the cool night air. Something about everything that had just happened made him miss his loved ones, and a desire to see them grew in his heart. Should I check on them then? Malachi opened his consciousness to the night and suddenly he could see everything that was covered in darkness once again. He focused his mind on Aubrey and found that she was sitting on the couch at his house, next to Aisha. The two appeared to be watching a movie and had even ordered pizza. I wonder if they'll bother to save me any. Me thought of Say and was surprised when he saw her and Luna eating together in a fancy restaurant. When did those two become such close friends? He wondered. While he could listen in on their conversation, he figured that would be an even bigger invasion of privacy than spying on them like this, so he decided against it. Last, he decided to check on Serana, and he immediately regretted it when he saw her about to step into the shower. Gross and weird. Gross and weird. While he knew that Serana was a pretty girl, after being friends for so long, he'd never be able to see her as anything other. Plus he already had her mom, and from the small flashes he'd seen, he was pretty sure Say's charm beat her daughter's by miles. Suddenly a person creeped into Mal's mind and he couldn't help but wonder about her well-being. It wouldn't hurt to check, right? Before Mal knew it, he was sifting through his consciousness searching for Melanie. Melanie was currently sitting on a couch in the middle of a fairly nice home. Derek was currently in the other room sleeping, and she could not be more grateful for the moment of peace. She hated everything about the man, from his attitude to the way he treated her, but she especially hated that she could not escape him. As Melanie absent-mindedly scrolled online, she soon saw a poll asking a very popular question. Who was more attractive, Malachi Saint or Alex Heller? She'd seen this debate circulating online quite a bit since Malachi first stepped into public eye. Although I'm certain he wouldn't care about something like this. Melanie's eyes became weary and sad as she pressed the button to vote for Malachi. She was rather unsurprised to see that 85% of the voters agreed with her and her ex was winning by a landslide. I've always found him cute, but now. Melanie shook her head to free herself from dangerous thoughts. Things were over, it wouldn't do any good to go fantasizing about him now. She scrolled a little further and saw pictures of Mal kissing an older woman. The internet had of course done a deep dive on the woman and found that she was a small restaurant owner and a single mother. Young girls all over the country were devastated to learn that they were not Mal's type. Is this my fault for calling her that night? She wondered. She'd only called because she didn't want Mal to lie out in the street unconscious, and she knew he didn't have the money for medical fees. The only other contact in his phone was this woman and Aisha, and since she did not want the white-haired war princess to stomp out her skull, she figured this woman was the safer option. Should I expect a wedding invitation? They are together because of me after all. She joked with a silly grin. What do we have here? Melanie's eyes widened in horror and she quickly tried to tuck away her phone only to have it snatched away before she could. She quickly spun around to see Derek looking through her phone with a displeased expression. You're fucking pathetic. Were you actually thinking about going back to this bastard? Melanie knew she had to choose her words carefully. Ever since Malachi had been blessed, Derek had been incredibly afraid and irate. The worry that Mal would come to take revenge, accompanied by the inferiority that rose inside whenever he saw his handsome new face on TV, was more than enough to erode his sanity. He wouldn't take me back even if I got on my knees and begged after everything you said. She finally said. Oh? Having second thoughts are we? It was you who agreed to sleep with me for money, but now you're feeling guilty? Melanie swallowed her regret and didn't say anything. How could she? While there was more to the situation than Derek had said, it's true that she had indeed betrayed Malachi. Why, I wouldn't have done that if you had given me any other choice. She had only come to him originally to ask to borrow some money since she knew he was well off. Things were never supposed to come to this. Her words only served to infuriate him and he grabbed the girl by her hair and pulled her close. You slut. You think you're too good for me? Tears welled up in Melanie's eyes. Not because of the pain from having her hair pulled, but because of his words that seemed to taunt her. She no longer believed she was good enough for anyone. The fact of the matter was that she had sold her body like some prostitute. The reason didn't matter, what mattered was that she felt disgusted with herself every time she looked in the mirror. Seeing that his question wasn't being answered, Derek became even more furious and struck Melanie hard across the face and sent her tumbling backwards. Melanie was so stunned, the pain barely registered. Derek had been violent with her, but he'd never hit her in the face before. She wondered just how much worse things would get when her world went dark as she hit her head on a nearby table. Her abuser seemed unconcerned with her condition and prepared to take his belt off to give her a few good lashes. He would ingrain respect for him into her very bones. Or so he intended. As soon as he raised his hand to deliver the first strike, dark mist swirled around in front of him and out of it stepped an enraged Malachi. All he'd seen was Melanie get hit and he immediately teleported here. He was furious with himself for being too late. He was even more furious for not stopping Melanie earlier in the day. Idiot, I'm such an idiot. Derek continued to back away until he was against a wall. Malachi's appearance could hardly be seen as something human. His hands had long turned into sharp, dark claws that looked like they could cut through metal. His eyes were glowing so brightly that his dark sunglasses no longer concealed them. Mal, look I dash. Malachi raised a single clawed hand and activated his telekinesis. Derek's body immediately floated up and flew towards his outstretched hand. Gah! The man could do nothing but cry out in pain as Malachi's claws dug into his neck. He attempted to struggle and even fight back, but each blow he struck against Malachi's blessed body only served to injure his own fists. I don't know why I wasted so much time, I should have come to kill you a lot sooner. Malachi growled. I'll maim him. I'll string him up with his own intestines. I need to see the life drain from his body. I'll dash. Malachi lost his train of thought when a thick metallic scent entered his nose. He looked behind him and his eyes widened in horror when he saw a scary amount of blood pooling around Melanie's head. Malachi forgot all about his anger as he threw Derek over his shoulder and scooped up Melanie. Her breathing was faint and she was growing even paler by the second. He forgot all about his hatred for Derek as he once again became enveloped in black mist before he disappeared. Derek stayed on the ground for a while as he held his neck to stop the bleeding. Luckily, Malachi's claws had just missed his carotid artery, so his bleeding wasn't nearly as bad as Melanie's. Eventually, he scrambled to his feet and ran to his bedroom. Quickly grabbing his suitcase, he began to fill it with clothes, money, and anything else of value he owned. He had to run away. He had to run very, very far away. Can I get some help over here? Mal appeared in the middle of the fanciest hospital he could find and immediately cried out for help. Doctors and nurses were stunned when one of the most famous men in the world suddenly showed up shirtless and carrying a bloodied girl. After getting over their surprise, they immediately sprung into action and gingerly took Melanie from his arms. Sir. Do you mind telling us what happened? One of the nurses asked. She was trying to do her job and remain professional, but it was extremely difficult since Mal had yet to cover up his body. Malachi begrudgingly told the nurse that she was his friend who was being abused and he just so happened to come by in time to save her. He tended to keep his omniscience a secret, since he figured it would make people uncomfortable around him. I mean, who would like it if they knew it was virtually impossible to keep secrets from him? During the night, he could be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The nurse listened to his testimony and immediately contacted police to arrest Derek. Although Malachi was certain they would not find him, at least not so easily. He could currently see him loading up his car fervently and preparing to drive away. I'll deal with you later, he muttered before taking a seat in the waiting room. For now, nothing mattered more than making sure Melanie was all right. The nurse from before delivered him a spare shirt so he was no longer drawing the gazes of all of the nurses. Although, the nurse who originally gave him the shirt was now getting hateful glares from her coworkers. They wanted to keep enjoying the show, damn it. They got to see bodies all day long, but none like this. As Mal sat in the waiting room, he fought desperately to keep his eyes open. He still hadn't recovered from his strenuous training earlier, so teleporting twice and using his enhanced sight was really taking its toll. I can't rest. Not until I know she's okay. 1 hour later. A nurse finally came to get Malachi and took him into Melanie's hospital room. There he saw her sleeping blissfully with a tube in her mouth and bandages around her head. She's out of danger for now, but she does appear to be comatose. The doctor said with a sorrowful expression. Those words broke Malachi's heart as he stared absent-mindedly at the girl he used to love. I'll give you some time alone. The nurse exited from the room, closing the door behind her and leaving Mal alone with only his anguish. Malachi stared at Melanie motionlessly for a while before he moved beside her and took her hand. I'm sorry, Mel. I should have stopped you back at the school, but, truth be told, I wanted to wash my hands of you. He said honestly. No amount of words could adequately express the guilt he felt in this moment. He knew Melanie was hurting and being abused, yet he still averted his gaze. Why? Because she hurt him. Even though she'd apologized and even though he'd already moved on, he would never forget her betrayal. How could he? This was the first person he'd ever loved after all. But that didn't mean he should have ignored what was happening to her. This is all my fault. Mal muttered. Tears threatened to fall from his face, but he did not allow them. He didn't feel he deserved to cry. Melanie was the one in the hospital bed, not him. If she wasn't crying, then he couldn't either. Malachi lightly squeezed the hand of the sleeping girl and made a solemn vow. I hope whenever you wake up we can have a real chance at being friends, and not just hurt each other and apologize like we've been doing. Responding to his desire, his blessing from the archangel activated on its own. Mal suddenly felt an enormous amount of energy leave his body. Since he was already exhausted, that was all it took for him to go tumbling to the ground. As Mal slipped into unconsciousness, a golden light left his body and entered Melanie's forehead. A shining gold mark appeared briefly before it vanished entirely. 4 days later. Sunlight streamed through wide open curtains down onto a nearby bed. In it was a sleeping Malachi who looked to be having the most blissful dream of his life. Suddenly, his eyes began to flutter open, only for him to immediately shut them when he felt the blinding light from the morning sun. He released a loud dissatisfied groan when he realized he could not be in his own room. He'd specifically ordered extra thick curtains to prevent this sort of uncomfortable awakening. Mal? Malachi opened his eyes and sat up on the bed when he realized he was not alone. Only then did he notice he was in a very nice hospital room with Say and Aubrey. While Aubrey was still sleeping peacefully, Say was now wide awake after hearing Malachi's groaning. Ah. Waking up to your face really is the best, Malachi said as he stared dreamily at his attractive girlfriend. Those words seemed to send the woman over the edge, and before Mal knew it, she was weeping furiously as she leapt on top of him. I am so glad you're okay. Hey, what's all this crying for? Malachi asked as he wiped her tears. Why you've been unconscious for 4 days? Say cried. Pardon? Malachi asked in shock. Don't you mean 4 hours? No. Malachi could do nothing but hold his weeping girlfriend in surprise. He felt like he'd just had a really nice nap, but he'd actually been in a small coma. Brother. Aubrey was now awake and she too was crying all over Malachi. What happened to you? You had all of us so worried. Mal was suddenly drawing a blank. He didn't remember what happened exactly. Though the sudden question did remind him of what he was doing here in the first place. Is Melanie okay? He suddenly asked. Aubrey and Say suddenly made uncomfortable expressions. Mal immediately feared the worst and his heart began to accelerate rapidly. She's fine but... Aubrey began. But what? Honey. Say shyly began. Did you do something to her? Malachi felt his face heat up as he heard his girlfriend ask him the worst question imaginable. What? No. You know I want you to be my first woman. Gross. Aubrey cried. That's not what I meant. Say blushed furiously and she tried not to show how happy she was with Malachi's sudden declaration. Oh. Malachi immediately calmed down and said a silent apology to his sister for any trauma he may have caused. Then what's going on with her? Mal asked again. The girls looked at each other with complicated eyes before Aubrey spoke. Well, Malachi was able to get out of his hospital room fairly easily. Because doctors figured there was nothing wrong with him and he was just exhausted, he wasn't actually hooked up to anything. Currently, he was nestled up against Say's breasts in his cat form as she carried him to Melanie's room. He'd decided that this was the best way to move throughout the hospital without drawing attention. It had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that he wanted to feel her breasts. The two were completely unrelated. So soft, like giant marshmallows. She smells great too. Oddly enough, Say was having similar thoughts. He's so soft and fluffy. He has to be the cutest cat I've ever seen. She screamed internally. I should do this more often. Mal thought. I should ask him to change more often. Say thought. The happy mood of the couple was so palpable that the nearby Aubrey was collateral damage. Ugh, I wish they'd just get a room. She thought as she rolled her eyes. Upon reaching Melanie's hospital room, there were 3 doctors inside all writing down something on their charts. Hello. The 3 turned around to see a beautiful older woman holding a cat and an attractive young girl. I'm sorry ma'am, but this patient can't see visitors at this time. One of the doctors said. Suddenly, he looked Say up and down and flashed her a flirtatious smile. I would be happy to escort you to our cafeteria if you'd like. In truth, Say was disgusted and wanted to make her displeasure known. Before she'd even gotten the chance, Malachi leapt out of her grasp and returned to his true appearance. He possessively wrapped his arm around her and flashed the perverted doctor a menacing glare. The 3 doctors took several steps backwards. Of course they recognized one of the most famous men in the world, how could they not? But only at that moment did the doctor remember that Malachi was often photographed with an older woman that looked eerily similar to the one in front of him now. I was just Dash. Get out. Malachi ordered. He currently did not have his glasses on, so his eyes were burning an intense and frightening orange. The doctor wasted no time and hurriedly excused himself from the room. Was Malachi always so possessive? Say squirmed a bit in his grasp. Seeing a new side to the man she loved, she became slightly aroused. As Say's mind began to fill with dangerous thoughts, one of the other doctors finally got over his fear and realized why Malachi must have come. Mr. Saint, why you did this, correct? He gestured to the sleeping Melanie. I'm still not exactly sure what's going on, Malachi said. Aubrey and Say had told him something, but he found it too wild to believe. The doctors sighed before they began a game of rock paper scissors. What are you doing? Malachi asked in confusion. We're deciding who has to demonstrate, one doctor explained. Malachi didn't understand but elected not to comment further. Rock. Paper. Scissors. One doctor threw up rock, the other scissors. Damn it. Yes. I'm safe. Malachi stared at all of this in disbelief. Was what happened to Melanie really that dangerous? The doctor who'd lost put on a forlorn expression as he looked at Malachi. Can you at least catch me? Sure. The man seemed satisfied with this answer, and he took a deep breath before he pulled a clean needle from the nearby cabinet. He walked towards Melanie and prepared to prick her arm when it happened. Bang! Gah! A shield of bright golden light left Melanie's body and threw the poor doctor into the air. Malachi hurriedly caught him before he hit the ground as promised, but he was so shocked that he'd almost missed him. As hard as it was to believe, what the girls had told him earlier was true. But what was even more surprising was that Malachi recognized the energy. I think I might have did this, but it's not like I really know how, Malachi said honestly. The energy blast he felt earlier was frightening, similar to the feeling his golden flames gave off. So much so that if he'd closed his eyes, he would have thought someone else had his same power. You did this, honey? Say asked in shock. No fair. Why does your shitty ex get superpowers and not your cute sister? Aubrey finally made her displeasure known. I didn't give it to her on purpose, Malachi defended. Then give it to me on purpose. Malachi ignored her and walked forward to investigate. He tried a few times to absorb the power from Melanie back into himself, but it proved to be to no avail. Mal took a closer look at her body and saw a faint glowing symbol on her forehead. Hey, can you hand me my phone? He suddenly asked. Say fished Malachi's phone out of her purse and watched as he began to dial a number. Who are you calling? An old man. Of course, Rowan was extremely worried about Mal, like everyone else who knew him. His hospitalization wasn't on the news, but the fact that he'd left his car at his farm was very concerning. After he'd made sure Mal was okay, he immediately gave him all of the information he was asking for. Rowan deduced that Mal had bestowed upon Melanie the mark of Cain. In short, she was now unable to be killed by natural means. Any harmful attack not containing divinity or magic would immediately be repelled. Christ. When Malachi finally got off the phone, he rubbed his temples in frustration. Life had suddenly become way too complicated for his taste. If the doctors couldn't pierce Melanie's skin, they would have no way to place IVs to keep her from dying in her sleep. She would die because she was too well protected. Well, could you figure out how to remove it? A doctor asked. Malachi unfortunately shook his head no when he suddenly had an idea. No, but I know a way you could treat her anyway. Since Melanie couldn't be pierced by anything not containing mana, all they needed to do was to treat her as if she were a blessed. Usually, blessed do not go to hospitals, but there have been a few rare occasions where it was necessary. In those moments, the tools used on them were made from mana or inside of gates. It was outrageously expensive, but what other choice did they have? Mal told the doctors his idea, and they became incredibly excited. Using such high-quality tools was every doctor's dream. And I want everything you saw in this room to stay a secret, all right? Mal said. If word got around that he could make everyday people practically invulnerable, his life would become even more insane than it already was. Luckily, the doctors were not idiots and solemnly swore that her condition would remain a secret. With that done, he went back to his room to prepare to be discharged and was surprised by what he saw. Standing at the door holding balloons and flowers was Luna Autumn. Luna was surprised to see that Mal was not in his room as he'd been for the past few days. She immediately turned around and prepared to inquire about his whereabouts, only to immediately find him standing behind her. For a moment, only silence persisted between the two. They hadn't actually spoken since that night at Morgan's house. Luna was utterly unprepared for a confrontation of any kind today. She knew what she wanted to say, but would Mal be upset with her answer? The fear that he would began to cause turmoil inside of her heart. "It's good to see you, boss lady," Mal suddenly said. He wore his normal smile, but Luna could not help but feel hurt. He'd returned to the way he addressed her before. The one time he'd said her name was more than enough for her to never want to be called anything else. She swallowed her disappointment and flashed him a polite smile of her own. "It's good to see you're up and walking around. You gave us quite the scare." Luna, Aisha, Say, and Aubrey were the only ones who knew about Malachi's hospitalization. As his sister and only next of kin, Aubrey was of course notified when Mal collapsed next to Melanie's bed. She called Say and Aisha in a panic, who in turn called Luna. The four all dropped what they were doing and immediately came to see him. Luna and Aisha immediately knew that Mal had overused his powers when they sensed his weak aura. The girls guessed that he'd wake up in a day or two, which gave Say and Aubrey the peace of mind they needed. But on the third day, the girls began to panic. They couldn't imagine how he could have possibly expended enough energy to keep him unconscious for 4 whole days. "I'm sorry for the trouble." He scratched his cheek in embarrassment. "Humph, as long as you know how troublesome you are," she said. "These are for you." Luna shyly handed him the flowers and balloons she'd brought. Malachi graciously accepted, but in the next moment a question was posed that made his blood run cold. "Now that you're awake, do you mind telling us how the hell you ended up with your ex?" Aubrey asked. Suddenly, Luna and Say both began to give Mal accusatory looks. They knew he'd saved the girl from being abused, but they weren't sure how he ended up with her in the first place. With a sigh, Malachi began telling the girls everything, starting with how he first saw Melanie's bruises. Brother. Aubrey wasn't alone, all 3 of the girls were currently giving Malachi sad looks. The guilt contained in his story was palpable, so much so that they could almost see the aura of despair surrounding him. "Mal, it's not your fault," Luna said gently. "That's right, honey. You couldn't have known something so awful would happen." Say comforted. For the first time, the words of his loved ones fell on deaf ears. In Mal's heart, he knew that he could not believe in the words of the girls. The fact of the matter was that if he'd only bothered to stop Melanie earlier, or even checked on her just a moment sooner, things would not be the way they were now. There was nothing the girls could say to lift this burden from his mind. It would be another regret that he would carry with him for the rest of his life. But he could not allow them to know that, could he? "Thanks girls, I feel better already. Let's get out of here, yeah?" he said with his usual cheerful smile. Even though they could tell that his smile was slightly different from his usual one, they all elected not to press him too much. The group soon left the room, and as Malachi prepared to be discharged, he was hit with an unexpected question. "Mr. Saint, will you be taking care of the bill for the 3 of you?" a nurse asked. "Pardon?" he asked. "Yourself, Miss Melanie, and her mother." Malachi immediately felt like he was hit by a truck. Melanie never spoke about her mother when they were together, and because he did not want to make her uncomfortable, he never asked about her either. He knew better than anyone what it meant if you were actively avoiding the subject of your parents. "Yeah, I'll take care of both of them," Mal said. He didn't need to know the details of what was wrong with her, for now all he had to do was help. He owed Melanie at least this much. The women behind him knew they could do little to change his mind, so they did not stop him. Currently, Mal and Luna were riding in the car together. Mal absolutely did not want to go back home to laze around some more, so he was going back to the guild to get in some training with Rose and Aisha. Tired of the awkward silence, Luna finally decided to erase the tension between the two. "I'm sorry for running out on you, Malachi," she finally said. Truth be told, Malachi was unprepared for this sudden apology. Luna always seemed like a proud and regal woman who'd never apologize for anything. But then again, she never seemed like the kind of woman to make a face like the one I saw that night either. Malachi thought inwardly. Luna was proving to be full of surprises. "It's cool, but can I ask why you did it? I'm just not good with things like this." Her bright pink eyes took on a faraway look. I'll spare you the whole sob story, but I'm just not the kind of person who has fulfilling relationships. Luna, you dash. Despite that. For the first time in my life I want to try. She interrupted. When her words sank in, Mal felt his head spin. He thought for sure this was going in a completely different direction. But I need you to be a bit patient with me. She added. These feelings are all very new and I just need some time to process them. So, can we try just being friends first? This was the part she was worried about the most. She didn't want him to think she was outright rejecting him or friend-zoning him. There was just so much she needed to sort out. Her own feelings were just one thing, she still had to figure out how their relationship dynamic would work. She was still technically his boss. If things progressed further and their relationship was found out, people would say she seduced him to join their guild. She could already imagine the headlines. They'd make her look like some kind of predator. Please understand I just dash. Okay. Mal said without much thought. Luna was so surprised by his sudden answer, she almost bent the steering wheel in her hands. You aren't upset? Huh? Why would I be upset? Mal asked in bewilderment. I know this must be a lot for you because of our current relationship, so I don't mind being your friend until you decide whether to move forward or not. You don't mind waiting? Nah, you're worth waiting for. Those words filled Luna's heart with an indescribable joy. She hadn't realized how fast her heart was beating during this entire exchange until she finally let out a sigh of relief. Thank you, Mal, truly. Bang. Bang. Boom. The brutal exchange of blows between three high-level blasts sounded like roaring thunder reverberating against the walls. Jesus, Mal, are you on steroids? Rose asked in shock as she rubbed her aching body. Steroids don't work on us, remember? Aisha added. Then you explain why he's suddenly such a freak. Hey. Mal interrupted. I'm not a freak. The hell you aren't. You are pretty freaky, Malachi. Aisha confirmed. Currently, the trio were inside one of the standard white training rooms inside the guild. Mal spontaneously decided he had a massive amount of energy to burn, so he requested to spar not only with his favorite trainer, but his best friend as well. Because Aisha knew that he'd been in the hospital, she was going rather easy on him, but even still, he was doing wonderfully. Since she was blessed by a powerful god of war, Aisha understood all the nuances and details of combat down to the millimeter. Her body had long been transformed into something that could be called a living weapon. Despite that, her friend was actually managing to land decisive, fierce blows on her. She'd gotten a brief chance to spar with him before, and the power contained in his strikes was definitely higher now than back then. Rose was the most shocked. Since she spent so much time training Mal, she believed she knew his capabilities better than anyone. Imagine her surprise when she realized that her former pupil was managing to keep up with her at 80% of her strength. You girls better get ready, I'm not done quite yet. Mal held out both of his palms and showed off his newest trick. Two bright golden flowers sparked to life in his hands. The girls were momentarily stunned by their beauty, giving Mal the perfect opportunity to launch his attack. Flowers for the lovely ladies. Mal taunted before throwing the two miniature bombs at his opponents. Aisha could instinctively sense danger and wasted no time jumping out of the way. Unfortunately, Rose was a bit too slow and ended up being thrown back by the shockwave from the explosion. Boom. Kaya. She was flung face first onto the ground after letting out a surprisingly girly scream that Mal would never expect from her. Suddenly, Aisha appeared in front of Malachi in an unseen burst of speed and delivered a brutal punch to the stomach that immediately made him double over. Just like that, the spar had ended. Mal was getting flashbacks to when they were kids and she used to kick his ass all the time. While she stopped being so rough once she became a blessed, he had never forgotten that she was always a better fighter than him. Mal. How did you do that? Asterisk cough, asterisk I have a really good teacher. He weakly replied. A teacher? As far as Rose recalled, he wasn't working with anyone in the guild. Is he getting some special lessons from Lady Luna? Who the hell is teaching you to do something like that? Rose yelled. An old man. Malachi answered as he continued to clutch his midsection. If Aisha had applied even a bit more force, he was sure he'd be spitting up blood by now. What old man? Rose asked curiously. And so he weakly told them about his relationship with Rowan, while of course leaving out the purpose behind their original meeting. While Aisha already knew about how their relationship, she didn't know his teaching would be so effective. An idea began to form in her head and she asked Mal for clarification. Do you mind asking him if he'd like to train some of the girls here? It would be a lie if Mal said he wasn't surprised by her question. But when he thought more about it, he realized this would be a good thing for all parties involved. He had no idea when then the enemies the gods spoke of were going to turn up, so it would be great if all the girls learned to protect themselves better. Plus Rowan didn't get much social interaction, so Mal thought it would be good for him to be around people. I don't mind, but... Are you sure things will be okay? Aisha didn't need to ask what Mal was worried about. When he first joined the guild, there were a few members that took issue with him being there. Even though those voices were few, they were still there. Mal was worried that the same women who disdained his presence would be even more aggravated by Rowan's. You don't need to worry about that. Anyone who has something to say can talk to me since it was my idea in the first place. She defended. Plus if we get permission from Lady Luna as well, then nobody can complain, right? Rose added excitedly. As a well-known battle junkie, she was always looking for any opportunity to further her power however possible. Before anyone could say anything else, she was already pulling her phone out to dial Luna's number. Malachi sighed before he took out his to call Rowan. Something told him that when she heard he was involved, she would agree. Say was having a fine day after leaving the hospital. Her restaurant was as busy as always, and she was receiving rave reviews from customers. More than a few had asked to chat with her with questions about her recipes as well as what it was like to be with Malachi. In those moments, she could not help but blush and think of how happy she'd been. Life had become a dream that she never wanted to wake up from. Excuse me, boss? Say stopped her task of doing inventory in the back and paid attention to one of her waitresses. What is it, Ruby? One of the customers is asking for you. She responded politely. Say sighed and stood up, indicating for her employee to lead the way. As the pair walked through the crowded restaurant, they came to a stop in front of a nearly empty booth. Say felt her heart drop when she saw who was asking for her. It had been years and he'd definitely aged, but there was no mistaking it. Sitting timidly in her very own restaurant was her ex-husband. Say was only momentarily stunned before her body began to fill with rage. You. Why are you here, Minoru? If Malachi were here, he would undoubtedly be shocked by his girlfriend's demeanor. He'd never seen her so much as raise her voice, yet she was glaring at the man in front of her with an expression that could kill. Minoru could be described as a polite-looking man with salt and pepper hair. Unlike Say, he had begun to show more signs of aging and possessed a few wrinkles on his face. I know this must come as quite the shock. Shock doesn't even begin to cover it. Say refused to sit down and even clenched her fists in anger. Why are you here? I see you online a lot. He began. I'm happy to see that you found someone, even if he is a little young. He chuckled as if he'd just said something hilarious, and Say had to stop herself from breaking a soju bottle over his head. My relationship with Malachi is none of your damn business. You're right, it's not, and I have no plans to interfere in that. You couldn't even if you tried. Say growled. She was pissed and it was getting worse by the second. Every word from this asshole's mouth only served to infuriate her beyond belief. It was taking more and more effort not to cause a scene in her own restaurant. Minoru tried not to show that he was surprised by her words, but failed. In the end, he'd never expected his kind and gentle ex-wife to have such a viscous mouth. Be that as it may, my only interest is in seeing our child. You. Are you insane? You haven't laid eyes on our daughter once since she's been alive, yet now you suddenly want to play at being a father? I know I have made a lot of mistakes and hurt you both, but I want to make up for them. Make up for them? She's already an adult. You've missed everything that truly counted. Mentally, Say was kicking herself. She couldn't believe she'd ever fallen for anything that had ever come out of this man's mouth. I know it's a big ask, but I'm begging you. Please, Say. He bowed deeply. Say did not say anything, and simply stared at the man she hated more than anything. For the first time in a long time, she was unsure of what was the right decision to make. It was now nighttime and Mal was at home studying. Turns out being unconscious for 4 days leaves a person with lots of missed school work. Who knew? Say had come over to check on him and ended up playing the role of a sexy housewife. She was currently preparing tea to help him relax, and she even had dinner in the oven. Mal had told her they could just order takeout, but Say reminded him that just because he couldn't get fat anymore didn't mean she couldn't. As she poured the piping hot tea into a china cup, she once again wondered how she was going to tell Mal about today's events. Honestly speaking, she didn't want to worry about any of today's events and simply catch up on the time she missed while he was unconscious. Plus she wasn't exactly sure how he would react, and Say didn't want to risk him being the cause of another person's disappearance. Say walked towards the table where Mal was working and placed the cup of tea in front of him. "Be careful, honey, it's hot." Malachi smiled and prepared to give it a taste when he noticed her palms. They were red and irritated like she'd dug her nails into them. Eep. Wasting no time, Malachi pulled the gorgeous older woman into his lap and took her hand. What happened here? Say immediately felt like she'd been caught red-handed, and judging by the coloration of her palms, she was correct. This is nothing. Say quickly lied and tried to leave his lap, but Malachi held her firmly. Hey. Tell me what's going on with you. Malachi said as gently as possible. He'd been so focused on catching up on missed work that he hadn't been paying attention to Say, but now that he thought about it, she'd been acting strange ever since she arrived. Hearing the gentle way Malachi spoke to her, Say felt she had to come clean or risk worrying the poor man to death. Well. My ex-husband came by the restaurant today. She finally said. Mal did not immediately become protective, but this sudden revelation did make his heart speed up. He didn't know what had happened between the two, but he did know that Surana had never met her father. What did he say? He wanted to meet Surana. Oh. Did you allow it? Say nodded sadly, though she looked to be having some regrets. They're meeting right now. Malachi chuckled before he gave Say a peck on the forehead. Are you worried? She nodded slowly as she lay her head on his chest. Say could have refused, and maybe she should have. But she knew that her daughter had always wanted some kind of male figure in her life, and she didn't want to stand in the way of that. Her daughter was already grown and more than capable of making her own decisions. She just hoped that she wouldn't get hurt in the process. I wouldn't worry too much. Malachi said as he rubbed Say's back lightly. On the contrary, I think you should be more worried about him. Surana was currently walking through a well-lit park at night. Minoru had chosen this spot as the meeting place, and she was honestly less than thrilled about it. Creepy bastard, making a young girl show up in the park at night all alone. She ceased her internal grumbling when she finally caught sight of an older Asian man sitting alone on a park bench. Evidently, he saw her as well and stood up with a smile. Surana, you've grown into such a wonderful young woman. He said with a hint of sadness mixed into his voice. He held out his arms, indicating he wanted a hug, and because she did not halt her advance, he assumed she would comply. I knew it. I knew my daughter would miss me. He thought excitedly. Unfortunately, reality is often disappointing. Instead of the warm parent and child embrace he was expecting, Surana swiftly brought her steel-toed boot directly between her father's legs. A sickening, squelch sound could be heard, and Minoru immediately fell to his knees as he yelled in pain. Jayat dash. Evidently, Surana did not believe that was enough punishment as she delivered a solid right hook to her father's jaw, sending him sprawling out onto the ground. The money her mother spent on self-defense lessons for her as a child did not appear to have been wasted. Though one could not say that they were being used for the greater good either. Why? Why? Minoru yelled. Damn bastard. Surana looked down at the writhing man with unfiltered disgust. You think I want you around after all this time? Say had never spoken to Surana about her father, but that didn't mean she did not form her own hatred of him. She would never forget all the times in school where her friends would excitedly talk about their fathers, while she had to sit in silence. On more than one occasion had she listened to her mother crying, and she knew it was about their lack of money and support. To her, there was absolutely nothing to be talked about with this man. As far as she was concerned, they had absolutely no relation. She'd only accepted his proposal to meet to give him the simple message she'd been holding on to for 19 years of life. Don't come around anymore. Neither me or my mother want anything to do with you. She said coldly. With that, she left the park, leaving him on the ground writhing in agony. Ha 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 ha. Malachi threw his head back and laughed heartily as if he'd just seen the funniest thing imaginable. What? What did you see? Say asked curiously. Because she was too worried to relax, she'd asked Malachi to peep with his powers a bit and see if things were going well. He reluctantly agreed, and after around a minute, he began to laugh hysterically like this. She, pfft. Ha 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 ha. Malachi tried his best to calm down, but it proved to be ineffective. The cartoonish way in which Minoru had hit the ground had been much too entertaining to watch. Say had reluctantly told him why he left them, erasing any and all sympathy he could have held for the man. He was hoping Serana would have gotten another punch or even a kick in, but unfortunately she seemed satisfied with just that. That was great. I'll have to thank her for showing me something so funny. Say had finally had enough, and she puffed her cheeks out in irritation. She grabbed Mal by the face and began to stretch and pull like his cheeks were made of taffy. Why are you laughing? You're supposed to be checking on Serana. I was. Mal chuckled. He secretly found his girlfriend's pouting face to be very cute. Then what happened? How could their meeting be so amusing? Let's just say. Your daughter has pretty good aim. You should talk to her about playing soccer. Say was about to ask what that meant when her phone started ringing and she received a call from her daughter in question. She hurriedly answered, and the concern in her voice was palpable. Hey sweetie, are you okay? What do you mean you're heading home already? You did what? Ha 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 ha. Malachi couldn't hold it in and burst into a fit of laughter once more. Say simply rubbed her temples as she listened to Serana's breakdown of events. Serana, you really? Say tried her best to put on her stern mother act, because her daughter did technically assault someone and she didn't want her to think it was okay. However, she was having quite the difficulty suppressing a giggle herself. Long after Serana had left, Minoru was still writhing around on the ground. With great difficulty, he pulled out a burner phone from his pocket and dialed the only number saved in it. After a while, the call connected and a cold voice could be heard. What? I can't do it. She wants nothing to do with me, and she raised our daughter to be a merciless bitch. Minoru's voice was now several octaves higher than it originally was. Did you think it would be easy? You're a fucking deadbeat. Of course they don't want anything to do with you. However, that doesn't mean you're allowed to stop trying. The cold voice responded. I don't understand. Why do you even care about them? That's none of your business. You've already received payment, you have no room to question me or my motives. Embed yourself back into your ex-wife's life and don't call this number again until you're ready to move forward. And put some bass in your voice, you sound like a fucking girl. Click. The phone disconnected, leaving Minoru with only ruined genitals and bruised pride. Fucking Alex Heller, damn blessed bastard. Minoru groaned in pain as he scraped himself off the ground and prepared to head to the hospital. Along the way, he desperately tried to come up with a way to regain his family's trust. He shuddered at the potential consequences of failure. Mal had just seen Say out of his apartment. She would have normally stayed over, however with tonight's events, she elected to return home and spend the evening with her daughter. She of course invited him to come as well, but he declined in favor of a personal matter he wanted to take care of tonight. Derek was still on the run and Mal would not allow him the safety of being caught by police. After changing into a long-sleeved black shirt, black cargo pants and boots, he finally opened his consciousness to the night. All right. Let's see where you're hiding, bastard. Derek was currently looking nervously outside the window of his shabby rundown motel room. Normally, he would never stay in such a filthy, low-class place. But desperate times called for desperate measures. He was already outside of the state, so he was no longer worried about police, but he was sure there was another, more dangerous pursuer after his head. Malachi. The look he had on his face when he'd arrived suddenly in his home was nothing short of horrifying. Derek was certain that if Melanie hadn't been bleeding so badly, he would have died right there. At least that bitch was good for something. He wouldn't let his guard down until he reached his destination, his cousin's home on the other side of the country. Only a blessed could deal with another blessed, and Derek's cousin happened to be S-rank as well. However, he had to rest before continuing his journey. He'd been driving non-stop for several hours, and it was an utter miracle he hadn't fallen asleep at the wheel. He finally pulled over at the first motel he found, paid cash for the room and went inside. After putting his stuff down, he immediately began looking out the window to assure he hadn't been followed. He scoured every inch of the parking lot, but it appeared that he was safe and sound. Finally, he let out a sigh of relief. Seems like he was going to be able to get some rest after all. Who are you looking for? Suddenly, a voice Derek would recognize anywhere made his heart drop and his palms sweat. He slowly turned around to see a slightly disappointed-looking Malachi standing behind him. How are you? Geez, that's mad disappointing. I was hoping it would be like in the comedy movies where you didn't even realize you were talking to me until we exchanged a few words. Guess that's all just a fantasy, huh? He clicked his teeth in mild frustration. There goes his plan to get a laugh out of this whole thing. Help! Derek began to yell when Malachi suddenly grabbed him by the neck. Oh, you don't want to do that, Derek. See, 'cause then I'd have to tell anyone who came that you're a woman abuser who's on the run. Malachi warned. You don't want to go to jail, do you, Derek? Even though Malachi's large hand was around his neck, that did not stop him from nodding as hard as he possibly could. This caught Malachi by surprise. Really? Do you know what happens to men in jail? Never thought you'd be so excited to go. Malachi released Derek when his face began to turn blue from the lack of oxygen. Mel, wait. Let's talk about this. He begged as he tried to catch his breath. Not particularly interested. Mel shrugged and raised his hand. A single bright golden flame sparked to life from his fingertip. The old man said they burned sins, let's see what that means. With a flick of his finger, the small spark of fire flew into Derek's head. 1 hour later. A single police car pulled into the parking lot of the shitty motel. 2 officers proceeded to get out and headed for another pair officer standing a bit further away. Glad you guys came. One officer said. What's so strange about this, that you needed backup? I thought the perp confessed over the phone. An arriving officer asked. Well, an officer tried to explain but lacked the words. You'll understand if you speak to him yourself. His partner said, and he turned around and walked towards a specific room. Upon entering the room, they found a single man with dark hair sitting politely on the bed. When the man saw the officers, he offered them a gentle yet eerie smile that was frankly unnerving. Hello, officers. Fine night, isn't it? Derek said, with his smile not once leaving his face. Sure, pal, why don't you just tell us what you said when we first arrived? An officer said. Okie dokie. Derek said in a childlike manner that did not fit his rather bulky frame. My name is Derek Walker. In my life I have abused 13 women and raped 7. I have also taken part in a bit of money laundering as well as some drug distribution. Hearing his deeds out of his own mouth, Derek began to cry. How could he have been so awful? He'd destroyed so many lives, and for what? The officer nodded, not particularly concerned with this bit of information at the moment. And tell us, what made you want to confess? I have finally been made to see the error of my ways. God had bestowed upon me true sight and showed me the horrors I have committed. One of the officers in the back finally noticed some bruising around Derek's neck, indicating he'd been strangled at some point. Please, good servants of the law, you must arrest me and see to it that I serve no less than the rest of my life in prison. Derek pleaded with those same dead eyes and eerie smile. Yeah, we got it, just give us a moment. The officer turned around and ushered his co-workers outside before closing the door behind him. What the fuck was that, Bill? An officer finally asked. Do you see my concern now? The officer referred to as Bill asked as he pulled out a cigarette and lit it. I don't think this falls within our jurisdiction. The group nodded simultaneously. They couldn't shake off the eerie feeling they'd gotten from this case even if they wanted to. Still. I don't like calling those blessed bastards to interfere in police work. One commented. What choice do we have, Dan? I don't want to deal with this shit. The officer who'd complained gritted his teeth before grabbing his radio. It took him a moment, but he finally pressed the button and said the accursed words. This is Officer Daniel Mordello. I'm putting in a request for the assistance of the Dark Angels.